Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the fanfiction guy. Back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Female Deku Had Jet Engines? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Throughout his years announcing the entrance exams at UA, Hisashi Yamada had witnessed potential students prepare in various ways, from meditation to meticulously checking their support items. However, this time he was taken aback by a young female examinee with green hair and large angular protrusions on her back, resembling sleek jet engines. After he had outlined the exam's guidelines, she zipped around the auditorium, handing something to each examinee heading to the test area. Some students accepted the items, while others discarded them. Intrigued, Hisashi waited for the auditorium to empty before approaching one of the items left behind. To his surprise, it was an earpiece small, black, and angular, adorned with 3 green markings. It appeared to be a well-crafted device, which puzzled him. He found another discarded earpiece that matched perfectly, raising his suspicions. Although he doubted the green-haired girl had any malicious intent and there was no rule against sharing items during the exam, Hisashi felt it necessary to investigate further to ensure no one's chances were compromised. He made his way to the observation tower, entering the main viewing platform where his fellow UA staff members were gathered. Principal Nedzu, a small, bear-like creature, turned his chair to face Hisashi. "Is something the matter, Yamada?" Nedzu inquired, noting the time was nearly upon them to announce the start of the exams. Hisashi explained that he wanted to discuss the earpieces he had found. He described the girl with green hair and her unique quirk that gave her metallic wings, emphasizing that he felt it was important to examine the devices before proceeding. Nedzu hopped down from his seat and took the earpiece from Hisashi, inspecting it closely. He acknowledged that while there was no rule against sharing items, Hisashi was concerned it might interfere with the exam. With a chuckle, Nedzu approached Higuri Maijima, the excavation hero, and handed him the earpiece for further examination. Higuri examined the device for any external connections, finding none that appeared harmful. He connected the earpiece to a nearby laptop, and data began to stream across the screen, capturing the attention of the pro heroes in the room. The information scrolled rapidly, with only Nedzu, Higuri, and Shota Aizawa able to keep up with its contents. Eventually, the data displayed the number of active earpieces and indicated one-way audio flowing from them. Nedzu's chuckle escalated into laughter, drawing concerned looks from the other heroes. He realized the earpieces were not dangerous but would provide an advantage to those wearing them. Once he calmed down, he closed the laptop screen and returned to his seat, leaving the others wondering about his amusement. He remarked that this would certainly add excitement to the exams this year. With renewed focus, Nedzu turned to one of the testing ground cameras, honing in on the girl in question. Her green hair was tied back in a ponytail, and her dark gray jacket kept it from blowing in the wind. Hisashi's observations about her quirk were confirmed. She had metallic wings and 2 large diamond-shaped engines expelling streams of air. Smaller wings acted as stabilizers, and her feet resembled high-heeled shoes, elevated by small wheels. Unlike the other examinees, who wore casual clothing, she donned a formal dark gray dress uniform, complete with a black shirt, white tie, and light gray highlights. Her serious demeanor and the green hologram flickering in front of her suggested she was taking the exam very seriously, even ignoring another examinee trying to get her attention. Nedzu couldn't help but laugh again as the testing grounds gate opened, and the girl sprinted in the opposite direction, leaving a fiery red trail behind her before launching into the air. It was reminiscent of a jet taking off, an oddly thrilling sight. Ectoplasm, another staff member, questioned whether she knew the test grounds were in the opposite direction, as everyone watched in awe as she soared into the sky, capturing the attention of every staff member in the room. Watching the screen, the observers saw the green-haired girl rapidly ascend into the air, her glowing red propulsion fading just as she began to fall. Mid-fall, she skillfully reoriented herself, reigniting the red glow that propelled her downward at an impressive speed. She then sharply adjusted her trajectory, flying parallel to the ground and zooming past the other examinees, who were still unaware that the test had commenced. She banked hard around a building, showcasing her remarkable maneuverability. The entire room, except for Nezu, was left in shock at such a display. Even heroes with aerial quirks, like hawks, struggled to perform such feats. Nezu found amusement in the astonished expressions of his fellow staff members, hoping that this girl would pass, as her performance had already created quite a stir. Tashinori Yagi, the world's #1 hero and symbol of peace, was also captivated, recognizing the girl's movements. He muttered to himself about the Lomkovac maneuver, recalling how a villain had once used it to devastating effect against countless heroes from the sky. This villain had commanded the air like a king, only brought down by the combined efforts of All Might and his longtime friend, David Shield. Tashinori was pulled from his thoughts by a grunt from Shota, who kept his eyes glued to the cameras, tracking the green-haired examinee. With a relaxed expression, he watched as she navigated the test city at breathtaking speed, estimating her velocity to be close to 1,000 kilometers per hour. She peppered the 1- and 2-point villain bots with rapid-fire blasts, causing only minor damage. However, it was her approach to the 3-point villain bots that caught both Tashinori's and Shota's attention. She charged in, moving her hand forward as something shot from her wrist, smashing into the 3-pointer and reducing it to scrap. Sekijire Khan, the blood hero, Vlad King, commented on her impressive control of her quirk and her keen sense of battlefield priority, which many active heroes lacked. Nezu nodded in agreement, watching as she banked hard, rocketing upward alongside a fake skyscraper. A 3-pointer launched a missile at her, but she swiftly dodged it, climbing higher before cutting off the red glow from her engine mutation. She then rotated her body to face the incoming missiles, unleashing a barrage of fire from her shoulders. Nezu chuckled, noting that they might have 2 contenders for the top spot in villain points this year, gesturing toward a screen showing a spiky-haired blonde boy demolishing villain bots with explosions erupting from his palms. Midnight, the 18+ pro hero, observed an examinee ducking behind rubble while communicating through an earpiece. She grinned as the green-haired girl rocketed overhead, launching explosives into a group of villain bots before banking hard to the right and targeting another enemy. Midnight pointed out that the girl was helping her fellow examinees without hindering their chances to score points, as she had destroyed the larger villain bots while leaving the smaller ones intact. A comfortable silence settled over the observation room as the staff members shifted their focus between various screens, impressed by the caliber of candidates this year. Yet, Tashinori remained fixated on the green-haired girl, astounded that, after nearly 6 minutes of high-speed maneuvers that would exhaust most pro heroes, she showed no signs of slowing down. Instead, she was accelerating, racking up points while weakening targets for her peers. Nezu, with a mischievous grin, announced that it was time to unleash the obstacle, pressing the big red button to activate the 0-pointer arena traps. The staff members felt a shiver run down their spines at his expression. All attention returned to the screens as the examinees paused, hearing the earth-shaking rumble and looking around for its source. They were soon met with the sight of the 0-pointer crashing through a building, sending debris flying. In unison, every examinee took off in the opposite direction from where the 0-pointer had emerged. As the timer ticked down, a red warning light began to flash in the observation room, accompanied by a blaring klaxon that captured the attention of the entire UA teaching staff. Nezu's jovial tone shifted to one of seriousness as he inquired about the cause of the alarm. Higuri reported that one of the 0-pointers had knocked down rubble, trapping an auburn-haired girl with rosy cheeks, who was desperately trying to free herself while other examinees rushed past her. The situation was dire, with the 0-pointer still targeting the trapped girl, indicating a malfunction in its programming. Nezu, aware of the rising tension among the teachers, asked if it could be shut down. Higuri, frantically typing away, reported that the machine was unresponsive to shut down commands. The urgency of the moment was palpable. If they couldn't regain control, the 0-pointer would pose a grave threat to the girl. As the heroes rushed toward the door, only Nezu, Higuri, Shota, and Tashinori remained, their eyes glued to the main monitor. The camera view split, showing both the girl in peril and a green-haired examinee who had captured their attention. They watched in awe as the greenette dashed across the street toward the 0-pointer at incredible speed. Suddenly, she accelerated even further, a shockwave erupting behind her, shattering nearby windows and knocking other examinees to the ground. The thunderous boom of the sonic shockwave drew the attention of every pro hero. They focused on the greenette as she closed in on the zero-pointer, which was preparing to strike the trapped girl. Before the machine could deliver its blow, 8 projectiles launched from the green-haired examinee's arms, striking the zero-pointer's left arm with explosive force, momentarily staggering it and damaging the limb. Seizing the opportunity, the greenette soared upward, just inches from the zero-pointer's armored body, firing another barrage of explosive projectiles that were now clearly identified as miniaturized missiles. As the explosions rippled across the zero-pointer's body, thick black smoke mingled with the orange flames, obscuring the view. The pro heroes scanned the screen, eager for any sign of what was happening. Soon, they spotted the green-haired girl emerging from the smoke, ascending into the air. The camera zoomed in on her face, revealing a stoic expression that had not wavered since the entrance exam began. Sparks of blue electrical energy danced along her arms, and without hesitation, she moved them outward. The energy coiled around her arms before shooting down and dispersing at her closed fists, forming a solid projectile that rocketed down, creating another shockwave as it descended into the smoke. An earth-shaking boom resonated from the testing site as the smoke cleared, revealing the zero-pointer's head caved in, reduced to molten slag. The machine was now immobilized, looming over the pinned girl. Impact marks from the explosions marred its body, some merely charred paint while others were large sections blown away. With a grace reminiscent of a leaf in the wind, the greenette descended to the street, seemingly unfazed by the wreckage behind her or the astonished expressions of the remaining examinees. Her focus was solely on the girl trapped beneath the rubble. As she crouched beside the debris, she offered assistance to the auburn-haired examinee. Unfortunately, none of the testing sites had microphones to capture their conversation. Watching intently, Toshinori felt a smile forming as he observed the auburn-haired girl using her quirk to manipulate the rubble while the greenette applied her own strength to help free her. This moment showcased the essence of a true hero selflessly aiding a fellow student without concern for personal gain. Shota, curious about the examinee's number, inquired as Hizashi announced the end of the exam. His attention remained on the greenette as she assisted the auburn girl, who was struggling with a twisted ankle, supporting her weight as they moved toward the entrance. Netsu quickly pulled up the files of the examinees present that day, stopping at the image of the greenette. Examinee 2234, a late entry. Midoriya Izumi, he noted, scanning her file further. Her quirk information is limited, described only as a mutation emitter hybrid, named Aerial Supremacy. Shota remarked that with a quirk like hers, she would be a formidable force. He narrowed his eyes, watching Izumi help the auburn girl toward Recovery Girl. He decided she would be a valuable addition to his class, though something about her entrance raised questions. A quirk of her caliber should have come through a recommendation, not the general entrance exam. It was a mystery he intended to unravel. Inko Midoriya smiled happily as she gently picked at her bowl of rice and fish, feeling content after spending the last 3 weeks with her daughter again. It had been almost 10 years since she and Izumi had shared a meal in this apartment, and the thought that she had only seen her daughter properly for 2 weeks each year often broke her heart. However, it was a sacrifice made out of love. She remembered the day Izumi's quirk had fully manifested. While Izumi had always displayed wing and engine mutations, nothing had truly stood out until an incident at kindergarten. Receiving that call from the school explaining that her daughter had turned the play area into a crater had been shocking, especially since it had stemmed from a fight with her longtime best friend Mitsuki's son. Inko hadn't been overly concerned about the reason for the fight. Her focus had been on the sheer destructiveness of the newly revealed emitter aspect of Izumi's quirk. She worried about how best to help Izumi control it. During one of those nerve-wracking days, Inko recalled her husband's older brother, a man with a quirk strikingly similar to the emitter part of Izumi's abilities. Contacting her brother-in-law had not been easy, partly due to his work as an international hero. Explaining her situation had been difficult for Inko, as admitting she didn't know how to help her daughter nearly broke her heart. After trying to reach her husband Hisashi, Inko learned that he and his brother were stationed in the same area. Rather than offer advice over the phone, Hisashi insisted they fly out to where he and Tsubasa were stationed, which heightened her anxiety. Her worries were not unfounded. While she watched Izumi run off joyfully with her father and her stoic uncle Tsubasa, she felt a sense of dread. Izumi was over the moon to be spending time with her dad and what he called her best uncle. However, it was what Tsubasa's hero partner, an Englishman named Neil Lodge, known as the aerial control hero, Sky Eye, had told her that truly concerned her. He had said that Izumi's quirk could be dangerous if not handled correctly. Inko gazed out across the secluded airfield turned heroic space, watching her 5-year-old daughter run about with her arms out at her sides, mimicking a plane while her uncle and father chased her. Izumi's laughter echoed across the sunny tarmac, and Inko felt a mix of joy and worry. She knew her daughter wanted to be a hero, but if she couldn't control her quirk, it could ruin her dreams. Neil reassured her that with proper training, Izumi could learn to control her quirk. He acknowledged the difficulty of the situation but emphasized that reaching out to Tsubasa was the right decision. They could help Izumi understand her abilities. Inko felt a flicker of hope at Neil's words, but soon her smile faded into a worried expression as she asked how long it would take for Izumi to gain control. Neil's response was sobering. It could take several years, possibly even a decade. He glanced at the quirk assessment file she had brought from Izumi's first checkup and noted that it was one of the most concerning assessments he had seen. They couldn't be sure of the full capabilities of her quirk. Taking a deep breath, Inko prepared herself for the hardest question she could ask, even though she already feared the answer. She wondered if Izumi would have to stay with Tsubasa and Neil for training. Neil confirmed that it would certainly help, but he reassured her that it didn't mean she was abandoning her daughter. Instead, she would be giving Izumi the best chance to control her quirk and a head start at becoming a hero. Seeing Inko on the verge of tears, Neil offered her a tissue and carefully chose his words. He reminded her that this was like a prep school program, where Izumi would gain valuable experience not only in her quirk but also in seeing the world. It would open many doors for her. Wiping her eyes, Inko took a calming breath and looked out at her daughter, who was excitedly bouncing on her feet as Tsubasa strapped on part of his hero costume that resembled Izumi's mutation. Inko resolved to talk to her daughter about the situation, not wanting Izumi to feel abandoned. Neil smiled softly, recognizing Inko's care for her daughter. He encouraged her to spend as much time there as she needed, knowing that both Tsubasa and Hisashi would be supportive. With those words, Inko watched her daughter, filled with swirling emotions. She knew that Izumi would want to stay and learn everything she could. Inko mentally and emotionally prepared herself for the inevitable, resolving to remain a part of Izumi's childhood. As the week passed, Inko took the time to explain everything to her daughter. It was difficult to see Izumi struggle to understand why she couldn't stay, but ultimately, she accepted it. Inko knew she couldn't stay. Her love for Izumi would not allow her to see her hurt, and with the training Izumi needed, her presence would only disrupt it. She promised Izumi that she would call every day and even got Hisashi and Tsubasa to agree to ensure that happened. From that moment on, Inko settled into a new routine for the next 9 years, living alone in her apartment while waking at odd hours to talk with her daughter. She found untold joy in seeing Izumi's smile and hearing about everything she was learning and doing. The years passed for Inko in the blink of an eye. She visited when she could, watching her bubbly daughter grow and truly come to understand her quirk. Despite never losing her drive to be a hero, Inko noticed Izumi becoming increasingly serious about heroics. Even with this more serious outlook, Inko felt proud of how far her daughter had come in her desire to be a hero and was always willing to support her dream. It wasn't until 3 weeks before the entrance exam, when Izumi returned home, that Inko sensed something was off. Although cheerful and happy to be back, Inko had a gut feeling that something troubled her daughter. A mother's intuition told her that the dullness in Izumi's eyes was a sign of deeper issues. It took time and a considerable amount of persuasion to get Hisashi to reveal what had happened, and even then, he only shared the details after Inko promised not to bring it up unless Izumi did. When Inko learned what had caused the dullness in her daughter's eyes, she struggled to hold back tears. She could not fathom the weight of the tragic event Izumi had experienced. Lacking similar experiences to draw upon, Inko focused on being the supportive mother she had always been, hoping to encourage Izumi to talk about it. During dinner one evening, she asked her daughter if her dream of becoming a hero had ever changed. The answer shocked Inko. Izumi expressed her determination to become a hero whom villains would fear, vowing that no one else would lose a friend. Hearing those words from her daughter sent a shiver down Inko's spine, and she hoped that being accepted into UA would reignite Izumi's passion for heroism. Inko was pulled from her memories by the sound of the letterbox being lifted and closed. Although it was a bit late for deliveries, she stood to see what it was, glancing back at Izumi, who was still staring at the fish held between her chopsticks. Inko encouraged her daughter to stop staring and mentioned that it could be the UA letter. As Izumi slowly set the fish down, Inko smiled softly and headed to the door. On the welcome mat lay a plain envelope, the only distinguishing feature being the stylized golden logo of UA. Inko picked it up and made her way back into the apartment, gently waving the letter toward her daughter with a soft smile. The letter had arrived. Izumi rose to her feet and took the letter from her mother, delicately running her thumb over the wax seal on the back. She turned the letter over in her hands and returned to her seat at the table, her mother leaning over her shoulder to see the results. With great care, Izumi popped the wax seal and opened the letter, pulling out a folded piece of paper and a small silvery disc. As the disc rolled across the table, it came to a stop, lighting up and projecting the image of the most recognizable hero in the world, All Might. His loud and enthusiastic voice filled the room, taking Inko by surprise and causing her to stumble back. All Might announced that he was there to deliver the results of the entrance exam, striking his signature pose before laughing. He paused as someone off-screen gestured for him to hurry up, leading to a humorous exchange. After a moment, he straightened himself, focusing on the camera again. He revealed that not only had Izumi scored within the top 3% on the written exam, but her impressive total of villain points placed her first by a wide margin. A scoreboard appeared, showing her name at the top with a total of 99 villain points. Izumi couldn't help but smile when she saw who was in second place: Katsuki Bakugo, her once best friend from childhood. Before she could say anything, Inko wrapped her arms tightly around Izumi, pulling her into a loving embrace. Tears of pride and joy flowed from her eyes as she expressed how proud she was of her daughter. All Might continued, catching both mother and daughter off guard. He mentioned that villain points were not the only points awarded during the examination and that he had something for Izumi to watch. Pulling out a small silver remote, he clicked it, and the camera zoomed in on another screen. As the clip began, Izumi recognized the auburn-haired girl she had helped during the zero-pointer incident. Achiko Uraraka had been bubbly and friendly, and Izumi was happy to share a class with her. The clip showed Achiko flagging down present Mike. Izumi felt her cheeks heat up at the thought of someone other than her parents and uncles talking about her, especially Achiko, which sent a warm feeling through her chest. Izumi watched the projection, her heart racing with excitement. The video shifted back to Achiko and present Mike. Achiko described a girl with jet wings and green hair, mentioning her name was Izumi Midoriya. She gestured animatedly, expressing her desire to share her points with Izumi, who had risked everything to rescue her. Achiko's passion grew as she pleaded for recognition of Izumi's bravery, emphasizing that someone willing to face danger for others deserved more than anyone. All Might chuckled softly, his back to the camera. He praised Achiko's quirk and highlighted that her actions inspired others, which was why he was there. Turning to face the camera, he revealed that Izumi was not the only one who had made an impression during the exam. The screen displayed recordings of various examinees, showcasing their heroic deeds as they saved others from the relentless villain bots. All Might passionately declared that no heroic school would reject someone willing to go above and beyond to help others. He gestured to the scoreboard, where the word "rescue" appeared above a column that gradually filled with numbers. Izumi's heart raced as she saw that she had earned 75 rescue points. Feeling her knees weaken, Izumi realized she had achieved a total of 174 points. Inko hugged her tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face at her daughter's remarkable accomplishment. For the first time during the entire projection, All Might said Izumi's name, sending a wave of pride through her. He congratulated her on becoming a part of Hero Academia. As the projection ended, Izumi wore a soft smile while Inko fussed over her, overwhelmed with emotion and struggling to express her pride. Izumi knew her father and Uncle I would react similarly, while Uncle Ribbons would likely be proud but not surprised by her achievement. The joyful atmosphere of their apartment was soon interrupted by the furious shouts of their neighbor. Katsuki's voice echoed through the walls, expressing disbelief at being outperformed by the Deku, who had vanished years ago. Izumi couldn't help but smile, recalling her mother's stories about Katsuki's growing ego over the years. As the night progressed, Izumi and Inko called her dad and both uncles to share the news. Izumi beamed with happiness as they congratulated her, appreciating Uncle Ribbon's advice to keep her ego in check. When she finally crawled into bed, Izumi gazed at the posters on her ceiling, her eyes slowly closing as a pleasant sense of rest washed over her. She looked forward to the new dawn of her life. The next day, Izumi stood before the oversized door of Class 1A, reminiscent of the various places Uncle Ribbons and Uncle I had moved to during her childhood. A soft smile crossed her face as memories of learning to control her quirk and the diverse experiences she had encountered filled her mind. She reached out to grasp the handle, relieved that the door was as wide as it was tall. Unlike her apartment, she wouldn't have to enter and exit sideways. It was an obvious downside to her quirk, but she hoped it wouldn't be an issue too often. As she slid the door open, Izumi stopped, hearing a voice that had been present before Present Mic announced the start of the entrance exam. She couldn't hold what the boy had said against him. If anything, she admired him for it. He had the attitude of a true hero, noticing something that could weaken others and questioning it. Not many would have done that, seeing it as a way to earn more points. The familiar voice of the boy who had yelled at her echoed as she opened the door to classroom 1. Izumi saw him angrily gesturing at a familiar blonde-haired boy from her childhood. He was reprimanding him for putting his feet on the table, declaring it unbecoming of a future hero and disrespectful to those who had come before them. The blonde boy dismissed him with a scoff, his tone both dismissive and aggressive. He asked where the other boy was from, clearly unimpressed. The now introduced Tenya Ida calmly stated his name and the school he attended, only slightly taken aback by the blonde's outburst. The blonde boy reacted with disdain, implying that Tenya was an elitist. He threatened to blow him apart to teach him a lesson about his place. Tenya blinked, shocked not only by the rudeness but also by the violent threat. He questioned whether the blonde truly wanted to be a hero. Seeing the perfect opportunity to intervene, Izumi quietly moved in front of Katsuki's desk, her neutral expression shifting between the two boys while ignoring Katsuki's dark glare. She suggested that the other boy likely had the license to freely use his quirk. Turning to face Tenya, she extended her hand and introduced herself, confirming his name. Tenya, surprised by how the green-haired girl was ignoring the angry blonde, reached out to shake her hand firmly. He felt compelled to apologize for his earlier behavior. Izumi raised an eyebrow, curious about what he meant. She guessed the reason but didn't think he needed to apologize for the entrance exam. Tenya explained that he had misjudged her intentions before the exam, initially thinking she was trying to hinder others when she had actually figured out the true nature of the practical exam. He bowed to her, expressing his regret for misjudging her. Izumi shook her head, a soft smile on her lips. She reassured him that he didn't need to apologize, acknowledging that he had done what anyone should have done by questioning her actions. Tenya blinked several times before cracking a smile and placing a hand on Izumi's shoulder. He had never thought of it that way and appreciated that she had gone out of her way to help others instead of just scoring more points. Izumi shrugged, stating that heroes help those in need, which was all she had been doing. Just then, the door opened again, and a familiar auburn-haired girl poked her head in. Izumi smiled and waved at Achiko Uraraka as she entered the room, earning a smile and wave in return while walking toward her, with Tenya following. Achiko beamed happily, excitedly acknowledging that Izumi had made it in. Izumi returned the sentiment, patting Achiko on the shoulder and expressing her happiness for her success. She then introduced Tenya to Achiko. Before Achiko could greet Tenya, he bowed in front of her, causing her to look at Izumi in confusion. Izumi blinked, wondering what Tenya was doing. Tenya then expressed that he also owed Achiko an apology. His passionate voice made Achiko tilt her head in confusion. Izumi realized what he was likely apologizing for. She had seen him standing there after the practical exam, staring as she helped Achiko to Recovery Girl. He likely blamed himself for not helping her during the exam. He explained that he had seen her pinned under the rubble and had done nothing, foolishly assuming that nothing could go wrong during the exam. He acknowledged that it was unwise to think that way, as it could have been real, and she could have been hurt. Achiko tried to explain, waving her arms with a nervous smile on her lips. She expressed her gratitude to Izumi, her face brightening as she clasped both of Izumi's hands. She couldn't thank her enough, recalling how worried she had been that the zero-pointer would crush her. Izumi blinked at Achiko, feeling a warmth in her chest. She wondered why she felt this way. After all, she had only done what any hero would do in that situation. It struck her that she hadn't followed the others who had run from the zero-pointer, as Present Mike had advised. Instead, she had charged toward it to help a girl in distress. A loud voice interrupted her thoughts. Ihiro Kirishima, a spiky red-haired boy seated next to Katsuki, exclaimed that he had witnessed Izumi's bravery. He jumped from his seat, moving toward her with an enthusiastic grin, praising her for taking down the giant robot. Before Izumi could respond, she sensed a shadow looming over her from the door, triggering her instincts. She quickly turned, raising her left arm, a missile tip protruding from her wrist, ready to defend herself. To her surprise, the shadow belonged to a large yellow sleeping bag, from which a tired, dark-haired man emerged, a drained juice carton hanging from his mouth. He reached out from the bag, pulling the empty carton away before stepping out. His tired gaze swept over the class, finally settling on Izumi. He pushed her raised arm down, complimenting her instincts before moving to the front of the classroom. He introduced himself as Shota Aizawa, the homeroom teacher, and instructed the students to change into their gym clothes and head outside. His demeanor struck Izumi as unprofessional for a teacher, appearing lazy and indifferent. Achiko questioned the absence of an entrance ceremony or guidance sessions, to which Aizawa replied that it was illogical to waste time on such formalities if they wished to become heroes. With that, he left the room, prompting the students to find the changing rooms. As Aizawa stepped outside, he assessed his class. At first glance, they didn't seem particularly impressive, but he noted their ability to quiet down quickly, a commendable improvement over the previous year's class. He was particularly intrigued by Izumi's swift reaction when he had entered the room. Her instinct to assess him as a potential threat was unusual for someone her age. This observation provided him with insight into her quirk, which had been used against the villain bots. However, her unwavering glare and focus on him raised a concern. While her threat assessment skills could be beneficial, viewing everyone as a potential threat might hinder her development as a hero. Shota didn't have to wait long as he observed the students filtering onto the grounds, noting the various expressions of excitement and confusion on their faces. He explained that at UA, they had a more flexible education system that also applied to the teachers. He paused, allowing the message to sink in as the reason for skipping the entrance ceremony. Instead of wasting time, they would be doing the same standard gym tests the students had completed in middle school, but with one key difference. Shota scanned the students of Class 1A before settling on Izumi. He noted that the country continued to deny the use of quirks for calculating averages, which resulted in inaccurate records. He called out to Midoriya, who stepped forward into the circle he was gesturing towards. He acknowledged her impressive score in the entrance exam and asked how far she could throw in middle school. Izumi shrugged and admitted she didn't know, explaining that it wasn't something she focused on. This revelation surprised Shota. It was unusual for a student not to have participated in such tests. He raised an eyebrow and inquired why that was the case, suspecting it was unlikely related to her quirk. She explained that being homeschooled meant she didn't worry about those kinds of things. Shota decided to have her demonstrate her quirk now, instructing her to do whatever she needed to, as long as she stayed within the circle. Catching the ball in one hand, Izumi tossed it up and down briefly, watching it spin in the air before catching it again. With a roll of her neck, She threw the ball high into the air, leaning back as familiar blue electrical energy began to arc across her arms. She kept her arms close, fists pointing away from her body and tracking the descending softball. Shota raised an eyebrow, curious about what Izumi was planning. The other students shared his confusion, but as the ball fell to a certain angle, it became clear. Once the softball reached that threshold, Izumi moved her arms out, and the blue electrical energy crackled along her arms. A burst of pressurized air shot out between her arms, colliding with the softball. As the pressurized air connected with the ball, a shockwave erupted, kicking up a massive cloud of dirt, followed by a booming noise that echoed across the campus. Shota stood firm while several students were knocked to the ground, his eyes tracking the ball as it shot off into the distance at incredible speed. His mind raced with calculations regarding the power output needed to launch an object in such a manner. Though he wasn't a mathematics expert, he understood that the power required to create a sonic boom was immense. He turned his gaze to the distance recorder he held, shocked by how far Izumi had launched the softball. He noted the importance of knowing their limits and saved Izumi's result as part of her overall score. Turning the device around for the rest of the students to see, he emphasized that this was the first logical step in determining what kind of heroes they would become. As the students stared at Izumi's score, many were in awe, recognizing it as a benchmark to aim for. With a distance of 3,218.69 meters, it was an impressive feat to match, let alone surpass. After the initial shock of Izumi's remarkable achievement, the rest of Class 1A began to excitedly discuss the upcoming gym tests. Mina Ishido, with her pink hair and energetic demeanor, exclaimed that using their quirks would make it an awesome experience, highlighting the excitement of the hero course. Shota smiled at the enthusiasm and let out a laugh, capturing the class's attention. He reminded them that while it might seem fun, they were training to become fully fledged heroes in just 3 years. He maintained a serious demeanor as he looked at each student, emphasizing the reality of the challenges they would face, including natural disasters, highway accidents, and rampaging villains. He warned them that those situations were far from games, and that whoever scored the lowest overall would be judged hopeless and expelled. Shocked gasps filled the classroom at the perceived unfairness of the situation. Before Shota could address the class about the nature of heroics, Izumi spoke up first. She asserted that life and being a hero were not fair, emphasizing that they would often be asked to risk their lives for those who could not. Her voice was firm, and her eyes reflected a deep understanding of the dangers involved in their chosen path. It was clear to Shota that Izumi Midoriya had witnessed the harsh realities of heroism and grasped the seriousness of the career they were about to embark on. Shota called out to Ida and Midoriya, directing their attention to the 50-meter dash. Both students nodded and moved to the starting line he indicated. Izumi activated the jets on her back, positioning herself with her wheeled heels firmly on the ground, while Tenya flexed his legs, releasing smoke from the exhausts on his calves. They both focused ahead, awaiting the signal to start, which came from a small speed recorder bought near the finish line. As soon as the signal was given, Izumi and Tenya launched forward, kicking up a cloud of dust as they sped past the finish line. The results were impressive. Tenya Ida clocked in at 3.04 seconds, while Izumi Midoriya followed closely at 3.041 seconds. Tenya muttered to himself about only reaching third gear, glancing over at Izumi, who gave him a thumbs up and a nod. Izumi remarked that the 50 meters was not enough for her to reach her full speed, needing at least 100 meters to truly take off. She chuckled as she returned to join the rest of the class, with Tenya agreeing about the short distance. As the day continued, Shota monitored the scores recorded for each student during the various tests. He noted that all the students utilized their quirks creatively, with Izumi standing out the most. During the grip strength test, she soared into the air, rapidly gaining speed before executing a sharp turn and applying immense force to the grip strength tester, surpassing 1,000 kilograms. In the standing long jump and endurance running events, she utilized the powerful jets on her back, launching herself across the sandpit and gliding just above the track until instructed to stop. Shota was impressed. Izumi had an exceptional understanding of her quirk, rivaled only by Momo Yaoyorozu. The sidestep test was the only area where Izumi did not excel, which was understandable given the nature of her quirk. Surprisingly, Minoru Mineta, who had struggled in other tests, performed well in this one. Shota noted that Mineta's quirk had contributed to his success, but he remained unimpressed by the boy's overall performance and attitude. If anyone was at risk of expulsion, it would be him. During the softball throw, 2 more students caught Shota's attention for different reasons. Achiko Uraraka used her quirk to make the ball weightless before pitching it upwards, causing it to vanish from sight and earning her an infinity score. On the other hand, Katsuki Bakugo displayed troubling behavior. Shota observed that each time Izumi outperformed him, Bakugo would glare at her with anger. This was concerning, especially when Bakugo, during his turn, shouted a fierce demand for Izumi to explain how she controlled her quirk. Before Bakugo could reach Izumi, she quickly turned to face him, her arms charged with blue electrical energy, ready to defend herself. Shota intervened, sensing the tension escalating between them. Heroics was a class every student aspired to join, yet each year only 40 students managed to qualify for the UA Heroics course. The 2 Heroics classes alternated between practical and theoretical lessons, aiming to ensure that the heroes in training could effectively use their quirks and possess the necessary skills to navigate the world of heroics. It was equally important to instill an understanding of quirk laws and the legal framework surrounding the apprehension of villains. Toshinori felt a mix of excitement and anxiety as he prepared for his first class. His nerves were primarily due to the presence of a particular student who bore a striking resemblance to the world's deadliest hero, known as the Grim Reaper of the Isuf. Toshinori had only worked alongside this hero twice, and both experiences had left him shaken by the sheer devastation that followed in the hero's wake. During their first encounter, Toshinori had witnessed the hero almost single-handedly dismantle Europe's equivalent of the now-defunct Meta Liberation Army, offering no chance for surrender and leaving no one alive who dared to confront him. This act sent a clear message to the underworld beyond Japan and America: there was a hero willing to take extreme measures. The second encounter had occurred 5 years prior, when Toshinori was preparing to confront All for One, the murderer of his master and friend, Nana Shimura. Knowing that All for One had amassed a loyal following, Toshinori sought the help of the only hero he believed could stand against him if he faltered. Although he ultimately defeated his foe, the cost weighed heavily on him. The haunting cries of All for One's followers echoed in his mind, pleading for their master as the Ribboned Reaper cut through them without hesitation. The cold, indifferent expression on the hero's face as chaos unfolded would forever be etched in Toshinori's memory. As he observed Aizawa's quirk apprehension test, Toshinori's heart raced, memories of that chilling face flooding back. This was intensified by the sight of young Izumi Midoriya, who directed her arms toward a classmate, electric energy crackling around her. The determination in her gaze as she faced Bakugo, who charged at her with fierce intent, underscored the potential danger she possessed. The thought of the next generation having its own Grim Reaper unsettled Toshinori deeply. If Midoriya had received training from such a hero, he knew he had to guide her toward the right path, just as he would with every other student. He recognized her selfless drive, evident in her actions during the entrance exam, and believed it was merely a matter of nurturing those qualities beyond what she had been taught. This was why he intended to heed Aizawa's advice. Aizawa had advised him to pay close attention to Midoriya during their heroics class, emphasizing that it was crucial to clarify that the training exercise would be non-lethal. He insisted that under no circumstances should Midoriya and Bakugo be paired against each other in any exercise. Toshinori had been taken aback by this request, unable to comprehend a scenario where 2 students couldn't resolve their differences in a combat setting. Aizawa had firmly stated that if he hadn't intervened, Midoriya would have shown no hesitation in unleashing her powers against Bakugo. She had been trained to respond lethally, which posed a significant risk. With Aizawa's words echoing in his mind, Toshinori shook off the lingering memories as he gripped the door handle and pulled it open with practiced flair. It was his first class, and he wanted to make a memorable entrance. He announced his arrival with enthusiasm, striking a pose and beaming at the class, who erupted in cheers upon realizing he was their heroics teacher. Every student, except for young Midoriya, seemed thrilled. If his suspicions about her training were correct, then his role as a teacher wouldn't come as a surprise to her. He would need to find the right moment to inquire about her training, but that could wait. Toshinori declared that they would embark on Hero Basic Training, a class designed to prepare them for the challenges ahead. He struck a dramatic pose at the front of the room, revealing a card that outlined the day's activities. The excitement in the room grew as he announced that today's focus would be battle training. With a flourish, he pressed a remote, causing the wall at the back of the room to slide open and reveal 19 cases that held the students' costumes. Noticing that slot number 1 was empty, Toshinori glanced over at Midoriya, who still wore a blank expression. He felt a swell of pride as he saw how excited the other students became at the mention of costumes. He announced that after changing, they should come out in ranking order to ground beta. While the rest of the students hurried to grab their costumes and head for the door, Izumi slowly stood up, pulling a sleek, silver-lined blue case with the white symbol of the ISAF on the front. The symbol featured 3 triangles forming a large triangle around a kite shape. Toshinori's voice softened slightly as he addressed her, capturing the attention of some students still in the classroom. He asked if he could have a word with her before she proceeded to change. Izumi gave a simple nod in acknowledgement and turned to the few students left, whispering something to Tenya and Achiko, who smiled and nodded back before leaving her alone with Toshinori. He inquired about why she had a hero costume provided by the ISAF instead of through the Quirk registry. Toshinori hoped to steer the conversation toward her training. Izumi replied that her current training suit was still functional and that it would be a waste to have a new suit made only to ruin it during battle simulations. Toshinori bit back a sigh. Her answer was typical of anyone who had spent extended PRDS with the ISAF. They prioritized function over aesthetics, unlike above-ground heroes with flashy costumes or underground heroes with dark, stealth-based designs. ISAF heroes wore a similar style meant to convey uniformity and shared ideals. While Toshinori appreciated this philosophy, he felt it was not one a child should adopt. He asked if she wanted to make a statement about the type of hero she would be. Izumi replied that she would rather let her actions speak for her, explaining that it was what she had been taught while learning to control her quirk. Seeing an opportunity, Toshinori asked about her impressive control over her quirk, curious about who had taught her such fine control. As he spoke, he noticed her eyes narrow, losing the warmth they had held. She questioned why it mattered, tightening her grip on the handle of her costume case. Izumi explained that she had been taught by someone who understood the importance of training a child with her quirk. Toshinori hastily expressed concern for the mental well-being of one of his students, insisting he did not wish to insult her or her teacher, he simply wanted to avoid repeating the same lessons. Izumi studied his expression for any sign of his true intentions but found only a teacher's concern. She reiterated that she did not see why it was relevant. Realizing he would not get an answer from her, Toshinori decided to leave it for Aizawa to investigate when he could arrange a meeting with her parents. He told Izumi to join her classmates in getting changed. With a nod, she stepped out of the classroom, making her way to the changing room, while Toshinori headed to ground beta to await the arrival of his students. He wasn't surprised by her reaction. It showed she already had the mindset of an ISAF hero, revealing just enough information to satisfy curiosity. As he stood waiting for the students to arrive, Toshinori contemplated how best to pair them up for battle training. He couldn't simply pair them himself, as it might seem like favoritism. Drawing lots seemed the fairest way to determine teams, and the chances of young Bakugo and Midoriya being paired were extremely low, making it worth the small risk in the name of fairness. Hearing the sounds of footsteps echoing, he felt a broad smile form on his face as he saw the silhouettes of their costumes. He declared that from that day forward, they were all heroes. He took in the unique and colorful designs of his students. Some costumes, like young Ida's, bore a family resemblance to his heroic heritage, while others, like Bakugo's, reflected their personalities and quirks. Toshinori felt pride watching the students admire each other's costumes. Tenya asked Izumi if her outfit was the same one she wore during the entrance exam and if she hadn't received her hero costume in time. Izumi shook her head, explaining that it was a training combat suit more suited for their upcoming activities, considering weather conditions and the area of heroic operations. Tenya nodded, impressed by her reasoning, admitting he had only thought of a single design for his costume. Achiko expressed jealousy, wishing her costume had been more specific in design, as it felt puffy and tight. Izumi blinked rapidly as she examined Achiko's outfit, feeling her cheeks heat up. Grateful for the high collar of her jacket hiding the lower part of her face, she complimented Achiko, saying it suited her. She pointed out that it was aerodynamic and would allow for improved movement while using her zero-gravity quirk, perfectly complementing her abilities. Achiko blinked in surprise at Izumi's description, her own face reddening at the compliment, thankful that her pink visor concealed her blush. Tashinori's voice boomed, capturing the attention of the students as he addressed them. He explained that while some villain fights occur in public, many take place in tight, narrow spaces like back alleys, abandoned buildings, underground markets, and tunnels. At the mention of tunnels, he noticed a dangerous and excited glint in Izumi's eyes, which puzzled him. Why would a student whose quirk was suited for outdoor hero work be excited about fighting villains in a tunnel? That was a concern for later. He announced that the students would be paired up for a simulation of heroes versus villains in a 2-on-2 indoor battle. Before anyone could ask how the teams would be selected, Tashinori continued, stating that, similar to the real world of heroics, teams could happen at any time between any heroes. To simulate this, random lots would be drawn to decide the teams. He drew a box containing the names of every student, but before he could draw the first name, Izumi's voice rose above the others with a question that surprised him. She asked if the use of lethal force would be permitted. The question drew horrified looks from nearly every student, as they could not understand why she needed clarification. This was training for the future, and if lethal force were allowed, many in the class could be seriously harmed. Tashinori, sensing the disturbance the question caused, laughed it off as a joke. He explained that while heroes might need to resort to lethal force as a last resort to save lives, it was not permitted during this training exercise or any future ones. He turned his gaze toward Izumi, trying to impress the importance of this rule upon her. She responded with an eerily calm acknowledgement, reminiscent of a soldier, which made Tashinori marvel at her ability to switch between being a normal girl and exuding the aura of a hardened soldier. Not wasting any further time, Tashinori began to draw the teams, projecting the pairings behind him. Team A, Yuga Aoyama and Momo Yaoyorozu. Team B, Tenya Ida and Fumikage Tokoyami. Team C, Achiko Uraraka and Eijiro Kirishima. Team D, Mizo Shoji and Mashireo Ojiro. Team E, Minoru Mineta and Rikido Sato. Team F, Koji Koda and Hantasiro. Team G, Katsuki Bakugo and Shoto Todoroki. Team H, Izumi Midoriya and Mina Ishido. Team I, Denki Kaminari and Toru Hagakure. Team J, Kyoka Jiro and Tsuyu Azui. With the teams chosen, Tashinori waited for the students to move to their partners before continuing to explain the exercise. He outlined the scenario. The villains had hidden a nuclear explosive within their lair, and the heroes needed to breach the lair and neutralize it. There would be a limited time window for the heroes to either capture the villains or disarm the bomb by touching it, while the villains had to capture the heroes or defend the bomb until time ran out. As the students buzzed with excitement, Tashinori pulled out 2 boxes labeled Heroes and Villains and began drawing from them. He announced that Team G would be the villains, while Team H would be the heroes. As he called out the teams, he felt a sense of dread at how fate had conspired against him, placing 2 students he had been warned to keep apart against each other. He knew he couldn't change the matchup without appearing biased, so he decided to proceed with the current teams. He instructed the villain team to enter the training building first and granted them 5 minutes for preparation. After that, the heroes would enter, and the exercise would begin with a 5-minute timer. Turning to the boys on the villain team, he instructed Bakugo and Todoroki to adopt the mindset of villains for the exercise and to go all out. Realizing the implications of his words, he clarified that if things became too intense or lethal, he would intervene to stop the exercise. He glanced at Izumi, who nodded in understanding. As the 2 boys entered the building, he handed the hero team a rough set of building blueprints, advising them to study and memorize as much as they could, as some information is typically available during hero operations. With his advice given, Toshinori joined the rest of the students in the observation room, hoping that this first battle trial would not end in disaster and that Aizawa's concerns were unfounded. Mina could hardly believe her luck, both good and bad. Being paired with Izumi was fortunate, especially considering her entrance exam score and her control over her quirk. Mina recognized that Izumi was a powerhouse, especially given her stoic demeanor when asking if lethal force was permitted. Unfortunately, they were up against two of the strongest students in their class, Bakugo and Todoroki, putting them at a disadvantage. Mina noted that Izumi would likely be limited in her mobility inside the building. Mina snapped Izumi out of her focus on the building, her holographic visor turning off as she raised an eyebrow at Mina's nickname. Mina continued without waiting for a response, asking if they had a plan or if they were just going to charge in. Izumi acknowledged the nickname, noting that it was as good as any she had heard before. She shared her rough estimations on how Bakugo and Todoroki might react to the situation, emphasizing their advantage in teamwork. She then handed Mina one of the small black and green striped earbuds she had distributed during the entrance exam. This earpiece would allow them to stay in contact with each other and All Might while providing Izumi with data on Mina's location and any threats that might arise. Mina was excited about the earpiece, recalling how Kiri had mentioned them after the exam. Izumi explained that she needed accurate tactical data for the exercise, but now she required more information about Mina's quirk. Mina proudly introduced her quirk, Acid, demonstrating by producing a small ball of it in her palm. Izumi's eyes sparkled with interest as she asked if Mina could control the viscosity and strength of the acid. Mina nodded enthusiastically, unaware of the predatory glint in Izumi's eyes as she smiled. Izumi pointed toward the building, explaining that she doubted Bakugo and Todoroki would work effectively as a team, which would be to their advantage. She speculated that Bakugo would likely target her first. Mina, curious about Bakugo's reaction the previous day, wondered if there was a history between Izumi and him. Izumi dismissed the question, suggesting it was better discussed later. She then leaned in close to Mina and shared her plan, which made Mina giggle with excitement at the clever strategy. Meanwhile, Katsuki and Todoroki, the villain team, remained silent. Katsuki glared at the door, flexing his fingers as sparks danced across his hands. He couldn't believe Deku had returned after 10 years. The last time he had seen her was in kindergarten when she had stood up to him, a nobody with a weak quirk. He had always believed that people with weak quirks belonged beneath those meant to be heroes. Katsuki had never understood that Deku's actions were accidental. After their encounter, he had woken up in the nurse's office, furious at what had happened. To him, Deku was a villain who had attacked a future hero. This idea lingered in his mind as he grew older, justifying why she had disappeared. When she returned, topping the UDA entrance exam scoreboard and surpassing his score, it only reinforced his belief that she was a villain, returning to mock him. Now, he had a chance to put her in her place, where he believed she belonged. He had always been told he was the best, and it was time to prove it. Katsuki sneered at Todoroki, instructing him to guard the bomb while he went after Deku. Todoroki, indifferent, remarked that it would all be over shortly after they entered the building. Katsuki, angered, retorted that Todoroki's quirk wouldn't be effective against her. Todoroki simply stared at Katsuki, waiting in silence. Eventually, they both heard All Might's voice over the building's speaker system, signaling the start of the exercise. Start the indoor battle simulation. As soon as the second All Might finished speaking, Todoroki slammed his right foot down onto the ground, sending a rapidly moving sheet of ice outwards. The ice quickly enveloped the building, immobilizing anyone standing on any interior surface. With a snarl of anger, Katsuki aimed his hands at his feet and blew up the patch of ice that had trapped him, counting to 10 in his head. He shot Todoroki a smirk, noting the lack of an announcement about the other team's capture. He taunted Todoroki, calling him a two-tone idiot, and stormed out of the room where they had started with the bomb, determined to hunt down Deku and her partner. As he stalked through the halls of the building, Katsuki growled in frustration. The ice was severely slowing him down. If Todoroki hadn't frozen the building, he would have already reached the ground floor and been all over Deku and her partner. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of his eye, a red glow from Deku's engines as she sped around the corner of the building. A feral grin spread across his face as he prepared to leap out of the building to chase after her. Just as he was about to jump, he sensed something was off. Deku wasn't charging directly into the building, and he hadn't seen her partner at all. Something was amiss, but he pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on taking down Deku. Mina approached Katsuki, tapping him on the shoulder. He turned to see her bright smile as she leveled her palms towards him, suggesting they get wet. Without waiting for a response, she unleashed a torrent of thick, viscous acid from her hands, coating Katsuki from head to toe. She ensured he was covered in her most diluted and sticky acid, allowing her to slide backward on the trail of acid she had left behind to avoid the icy floors. Katsuki roared in anger, wiping the thick acidic substance from his face. Surprisingly, none of the skin she'd coated was heating up, and his eyes weren't stinging. But that didn't matter. All he wanted was to take down this annoying opponent so he could focus on Deku. He moved both hands out towards Mina, a manic grin on his face as he attempted to ignite the sweat on his palms. Instead of the fiery explosions he expected, nothing happened. Realizing his hands were thick and slimy from the acid, he understood why he couldn't create an explosion. The very idea that this extra had countered his quirk so easily filled him with rage. Blinded by his anger, Katsuki lunged forward, arms outstretched towards Mina's throat. However, he slipped on the icy floor, barely maintaining his balance by gripping the wall. Glaring at Mina, who still wore a smile as she glided on her acid trail, he prepared to lunge for her again. This time, Mina greeted his attempt with another splash of thick acid to his face, temporarily blinding him. As he wiped the sticky substance from his eyes, she swept his legs out from under him. Katsuki hit the floor with a loud thud, groaning as he continued to clear his vision. Mina casually glided around him, her acid trails allowing her to ignore the ice. She commented that Midori had said he would be tougher and that she should stop him from making explosions before getting close. As she stopped next to Katsuki, she watched him struggle to wipe the gunk from his face. Seizing the moment, she grabbed his right wrist and flipped him onto his front, pinning him down with her knees. With a giggle, she pulled out a roll of capture tape and began wrapping it around his wrists, securing him. Katsuki couldn't believe what was happening. He wasn't supposed to be taken down by one of the useless extras. His quirk should have allowed him to dominate, yet here he was, pinned to the ground and angrily thrashing as Mina finished tying his hands behind his back. Villain Team Katsuki Bakugo has been captured. All Might's voice boomed over the speakers, causing Katsuki to stop struggling and lie still, his face pressed against the ground. This wasn't right, he wasn't supposed to lose like this. Closing his eyes, he tried to blink away the remnants of the thick goop that had been sprayed on him. He rested his face against the floor, grinding his teeth and ignoring everything around him as he heard the faint sounds of Mina moving off and talking to Deku. Katsuki struggled to focus on anything around him. His world had been turned upside down. All his life, he had been told he was the greatest, that nothing could rival him or his quirk. Yet now, he faced a harsh reality. He had placed second in the practical entrance exam, fourth in the quirk apprehension test, and had just been defeated in a one-sided battle by a girl who had barely made it into the top 10 of the quirk apprehension tests. Captured and unable to fight back, he lay face down on the ground, squeezing his eyes shut as he tried to make sense of his loss. After hearing the announcement of his partner's capture, Shoto surveyed the room where they had not moved the bomb. He had frozen the windows and doorways, but the space was still vast, with a tall ceiling and gaps between the support pillars that allowed for easy maneuvering. He knew someone like Midoriya would struggle in such a tight space. With his partner down, Shoto faced the heroes 2 against 1, so he needed to make the room harder to enter. The best way to do that was to coat the doors and windows in more ice. As he raised his right foot, ice shards and cold air began to swirl around it. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine echoed from the iced-over windows, followed by an explosion that shook the entire room. The ice formation halted as he turned to see the spider web of cracks spreading across the blue ice wall. Another high-pitched whine came from the other side of the ice wall just before another impact shattered the ice into sparkling shards, flooding the room with light and temporarily blinding Shoto. As he raised his arms to shield his eyes, he failed to notice Izumi flying through the newly created opening. He only became aware of her presence when he heard her voice, cold and clinical, announcing her intent to neutralize the threat. Before he could react, her shin slammed into his stomach with enough force to send him crashing across the room, leaving him gasping for breath. As he struggled to rise from the heap he had landed in after Izumi's kick, Shoto noticed her circling the bomb without even touching it. She had deemed him the bigger threat, and he was determined to prove her wrong. Slamming his right foot into the ground again, Shoto launched a wave of ice spikes toward Izumi, believing they would knock her out of the air and allow him to capture her. Instead of being struck, Izumi weaved between the spikes as they shot up from the ground, unleashing a rapid barrage of fire from her shoulders at any spikes she couldn't dodge, reducing them to harmless fragments. Her speed never faltered as she closed the distance, rolling over his ice-coated swing and delivering a powerful kick to the back of his head. The impact stunned him, leaving his head spinning. With a cold detachment, Izumi declared the threat neutralized before circling back to tie his arms with capture tape. She then instructed her partner to proceed with securing the bomb. As Shoto's head cleared, he noticed the ice he had used to block the door melting away, creating a human-shaped hole that allowed Mina to step into the room. She looked around in awe and whistled at the sight, but when Shoto attempted to reach out to her, he found his right arm tethered to his leg, rendering him immobile. Skipping over to the bomb, commented on how quickly Izumi had subdued Shoto, questioning why she had only tied up half of him. Izumi glanced back, her gaze cold and assessing, explaining that she had observed everyone the day before to understand their quirks. Her words struck a nerve with Shoto, who had vowed never to use his left side. It stung to realize that she had picked up on that so quickly, reducing him to a lesser threat in her eyes. Determined to prove her wrong next time, Shoto resolved to show just how formidable his right side could be. As Mina and Izumi touched the bomb together, they realized their victory was confirmed by All Might's announcement. Mina pointed an accusing finger at Izumi, pouting as she questioned why she had asked about her quirk earlier. Izumi, confused, replied that asking questions was polite, believing it was how one made friends. Mina laughed, finding the situation amusing, and suggested they help Shoto up and return to class. However, All Might's booming voice interrupted them, announcing that both Todoroki and Bakugo would require the attention of Recovery Girl and would be collected by transport bots. As he gestured to the small robots loading Shoto onto a stretcher, the three of them returned to the observation room for the post-exercise grading. As they walked, Toshinori replayed the entire exercise in his mind, recognizing that from the moment Shoto had frozen the building, Izumi and Mina had executed their plan flawlessly. Instead of entering from the top or ground floor, they utilized Izumi's ability to fly and accessed one of the middle floors. To be more precise, Mina had melted her way in while Izumi circled the exterior of the building rapidly, almost as if she were scanning for something. However, she wasn't just scanning, she was acting as bait, allowing Katsuki to spot her, likely relaying that information to Mina. Her takedown of Katsuki had been efficient and decisive, a strategy that Toshinori found impressive. He had seen her entrance exam scores, and while she had passed, she wasn't the brightest. The plan had the brutal edge of a well-coordinated raid, targeting the face first before suppressing the quirk. If Toshinori had to guess, it was Izumi who had devised the strategy. The same could be said for how quickly Izumi located the bomb and blasted her way into the room with 2 projectiles launched from her arms, before engaging Shoto in a fierce struggle over securing the bomb. Toshinori had to admit that what she communicated over the monitored comlink made sense. If this had been a real villain threat, it would be logical to assume they had a remote way of detonating the bomb. Therefore, taking Shoto out first was the smarter option. However, she had accomplished this in less than 30 seconds, and while her attacks were not lethal, they were forceful enough that he nearly called the exercise off. This was something to work on over time, but right now, Toshinori had a class to address, results to announce to the 2 students who didn't need to see the nurse, and the next 2 teams to test. He declared that what he had witnessed was an appropriate demonstration of how to perform the exercise, with both teams giving their all to ensure victory, yet the hero team had proven victorious. He gestured to both Izumi and Mina before pointing to the rest of the students, asking who stood out the most in that match and had earned the MVP title. Slowly, Momo Yaoyorozu raised her hand to answer, believing it was Midoriya. However, before she could finish, Izumi interjected, stating that there was no MVP. Her voice was sharp as she fixed Toshinori with the same cold gaze she had during the exercise. To say there was an MVP on either team implied that one was more essential to victory or the team's strategy, which she found insulting. Every member of the team was valuable to achieving their operational objectives. The entire class was stunned into silence by her words. Even Toshinori couldn't comprehend a student not wanting to be recognized as the best in the exercise. In the world of heroics, rankings existed to show who was better or at least more popular than the rest. But Izumi had not been fully raised on the ideals of Japan's hero-worshipping society. Toshinori asked if she was certain about her stance, receiving only a nod in response. He bit back a sigh before addressing the rest of the class, emphasizing that they had seen how a well-planned attack could easily lead to victory, as well as how poor teamwork and communication could lead to defeat. He paused to pull out the 2 boxes containing the teams, announcing that the villains were Team A and the heroes were Team J. He gestured for the 2 teams to follow him, noticing out of the corner of his eye as Izumi moved to introduce Mina to both Achiko and Tenya, while Mina brought over Eijiro Kirishima for introductions. Watching Izumi interact, smile, and laugh with her classmates filled Toshinori with a sense of hope. Perhaps the way to encourage Izumi to change was through her peers. Katsuki expressed his frustration, ignoring the intense glare Izumi directed at him as he attempted to spark his hands. He was bewildered by the fact that his quirk was not functioning. Shota explained that the cloth was a capture weapon made from carbon fiber and a special metal alloy. He held the other end of his scarf, keeping Katsuki in place, his eyes glowing red as his hair floated in the air. He informed Katsuki that he had cancelled his quirk and warned him that if he attacked a classmate again outside of an approved exercise, he would be expelled. Katsuki nodded in understanding, and Shota released his quirk, allowing Izumi to lower her arms as the blue electrical energy around her dissipated. Once the situation calmed, Shota took an eyedropper from his belt and applied a few drops to each eye. He then moved on to discuss the scores, explaining that their overall placement reflected their performance in each event. Holding the recording device he had been using throughout the test, he projected the students' scores for them to see, noting that it would be a waste of time to explain the calculation process. The scores surprised some but not others. Izumi Midoriya, Momo Yaoyorozu, Shoto Todoroki, Katsuki Bakugo, Tenya Ida, Fumikage Tokoyami, Mizo Shoji, Masahiro Ojiro, Eijiro Kirishima, Mina Ishido, Achiko Uraraka, Koji Koda, Rikido Sato, Tsuyu Azui, Yuga Oyama, Antasiro, Denki Kaminari, Kyokujiro, Toru Hagakure, Minoru Mineta. Shota observed as the small, purple-haired Minoru broke down in tears over his last-place ranking, lamenting that he would not get to interact with the girls or see his classmates in their costumes. His crying did not endear him to anyone in the class. Instead, it solidified their belief that expelling him would not be a loss. Shota revealed that he had been lying about the expulsion, taking pleasure in the shocked expressions of everyone except Momo and Izumi. He wondered if they had figured out his deception. He continued, stating that it was a logical tactic to motivate them to perform their best. However, he turned his gaze to the still sobbing Minoru, warning him that if he did not show significant improvement by the sports festival, he would be moved to general education. As Shota prepared to leave, he glanced back at the class, informing them that they were done for the day. He instructed them to review the curriculum documents on their desks, emphasizing that things would only get tougher from here on out. With those final words, Shota walked away, leaving the class to bond and make friends. He had discovered intriguing things about Izumi Midoriya. She handled her quirk remarkably well for a 15-year-old. He planned to arrange a meeting with her parents to learn more about her abilities. He also felt it necessary to warn Toshinori about allowing Katsuki to participate in training exercises with Izumi, as her reaction to Katsuki charging at her suggested she was prepared to respond with significant force. The thought that a 15-year-old girl's first instinct in the face of a threat was to respond with such intensity concerned him. It was clear that they needed to teach her to consider lethal force as a last resort rather than a first response. Izumi Midoriya was shaping up to be quite the challenge. The day had begun positively for Izumi, starting with breakfast with her mother, where they discussed UA and how different its teaching style was from her uncle's and the ISF bases they had used. It was a refreshing change, meeting teenagers her age who were aspiring to be heroes for their country rather than young adults focused solely on becoming ISF heroes. Afterward, she met up with Tenya and Achiko on the walk from the train station. Izumi had quickly realized that commuting would be a challenge due to her wings taking up more space on public transport. If it weren't against the law, she would have happily flown above the city to reach the station and meet her friends. However, her moment of peace was interrupted by an intrusive reporter who moved a microphone in her face, bombarding her with questions about All Might and demanding to know what it was like to be taught by him. Before her friends could respond, Izumi pushed past the reporter, causing her to stumble back into the crowd of reporters at the entrance to UA. She then fixed them all with a cold glare. Izumi demanded to know if the brunette reporter had written consent from both their legal guardians to approach them and inquire about a privately run institute. Her cold gaze was fixed on the woman, reflecting her contempt for reporters who twisted stories for ratings. The brunette stuttered under Izumi's intense stare, momentarily taken aback by the disgust in the teenager's eyes. If she didn't know any better, she might have thought it was simply the presence of a news reporter that caused such a reaction, but that seemed unlikely. Heroes needed the weekly news cycle to remain relevant. Izumi interrupted, stating that the public could find information about the staff on UA's official website rather than from reporters she referred to as vultures. She turned to walk toward the entrance gate, with Tenya and Achiko following closely behind. The reporter called out, trying to stop Izumi by grabbing her arm before she could cross the threshold. She insisted that they only wanted one small statement. Izumi slowly turned her head back, her expression unreadable. She asked for the reporter's name and the network she worked for. When the reporter blinked in confusion and asked why, Izumi flatly stated it was so she could file assault charges against the news outlet. Her words left no room for misinterpretation, and the reporter was left stunned as Izumi freed herself from the woman's grip. Shota's tired voice rang out, breaking the tension that followed Izumi's threat. He informed the reporters that they were interrupting classes and manhandling students, instructing them to leave. Initially intending to be polite, Shota's demeanor shifted upon witnessing one reporter attempt to forcibly stop one of his students. Seizing the opportunity, Izumi continued past the entrance gate, turning her back on the reporters as they began to raise a fuss. One reporter attempted to cross the entrance, only to have the massive security gate slam shut in front of them. Achiko walked beside Izumi, concern etched on her face as she asked if she was okay, noting that Izumi had gotten a bit aggressive. Izumi turned and smiled to ease her friend's worry, assuring her that she was fine and simply disliked the media. Tenya, not understanding Izumi's aversion, spoke about the noble service the media provided by seeking out and portraying the facts that the public needed to know. He believed they offered a glimpse into the work of heroes from the safety of their homes, an essential part of society. Izumi countered, expressing her belief that the media only cared about ratings and would twist any situation to fit the story they wanted to tell. She pointed out that they could easily misrepresent a selfless hero into a selfish glory hound by altering the facts. A silence fell over the group as Achiko and Tenya exchanged concerned glances, wondering if something had happened to shape Izumi's strong opinion of the media. Shota, overhearing the conversation as he walked past, was not surprised by Izumi's views. He suspected that her upbringing and training by the ISF had instilled a negative opinion of the press, given that the ISF often dealt with villains rather than capturing them. Shota saw no need to change Izumi's perspective. A hero more concerned with media appearances was not someone he wanted in any situation, whether it was a villain attack or a rescue operation. However, he did find fault with how Toshinori had managed the battle training. Using random drawings to decide pairings for battles was foolish and had led to injuries that Shota had specifically warned against. After spending considerable time explaining to Toshinori why his approach was misguided, which had resulted in one student suffering several broken ribs, a concussion, and a broken arm, while another required their eyes rinsed out and checked for lasting damage, Shota finally reviewed the battle recordings. He had been genuinely surprised by how quickly and efficiently Izumi and Mina had taken down Katsuki and Shoto. He knew the plan was entirely Izumi's work, but Mina had executed it flawlessly. It was a shocking revelation, especially since the pink-skinned and pink-haired girl had only just managed to pass the written exam to enter the hero course. Perhaps Izumi would prove to be a positive influence on her. Shota had also noted that Izumi had not once resorted to the more dangerous aspects of her quirk when dealing with Shoto. Instead, she had utilized what Higuri identified as an electromagnetic launcher to break through the ice blocking their entry, along with her machine gun rounds to dismantle the ice pillars in her way. The level of tactical thinking and foresight she displayed was impressive, indicating that Izumi was a student he need not worry about in practical situations. However, her intensity was still a concern, as the injuries she inflicted on Shoto, while not lethal, were excessive for a training exercise. Although she had kept things relatively safe, if her kick had been any stronger, Shoto could have faced far more serious consequences than just broken bones. Clearing his head as he entered the teacher's lounge, Shota grabbed the stack of evaluation grades and waved to the staff. He was interrupted by Nizu's voice. Aizawa, I have some good news, Nizu said, turning around in his swivel chair with a cup of tea in hand. I managed to set up a meeting with Miss Midoriya's mother. She will be here right after 6th PRD tomorrow. I'll make sure I'm available, sir, Shota replied tiredly, receiving a nod from Nizu in return. With the results collected, Shota made his way to his classroom, pleasantly surprised to see his students quiet down and focus on him in less than 3 seconds. He acknowledged their efforts in the previous day's battle training, skipping a morning greeting to save time. He placed the stack of papers on his desk and continued, I have reviewed your grades and evaluations. Some of you performed above expectations, while others did not. He turned to Shoto. Todoroki, by only using half your quirk, you are limiting yourself. Work on that and learn to collaborate with your partner. That applies to you as well, Bakugo. He shifted his gaze to the scowling blonde before looking at Izumi. Midoriya, good planning and teamwork, but in the future, try not to leave your fellow students needing an extended stay in the nurse's office. He proceeded to offer similar advice to each student. With that out of the way, we have some homeroom business, he said, noticing the worried expressions on most of the class. Sorry to spring this on you suddenly, but today you'll need to. He paused briefly, suppressing a smile as a third of the class began to dread his next words, likely fearing a pop quiz. Pick a class president. I don't care how you do it, just decide quickly and don't bother me. He settled back behind his desk and crawled into his sleeping bag, listening as the class devolved into chaos over the president position, only to be interrupted by Tenya suggesting they should vote. It was a logical idea, but he knew everyone would likely vote for themselves, undermining the purpose of the vote until he heard Izumi say she wouldn't want the position. I would rather follow someone who can lead, she explained to the various students clamoring to understand her reasoning. As the shock of her disinterest in the position faded, Shota slowly rose from behind the desk, watching as they conducted the vote. Izumi tallied the results and placed them on his desk. He wasn't surprised by the outcome, given Izumi's lack of desire for the role. So, your president is Ida and your vice president is Yayorozu, Shota yawned, standing up and climbing out of his sleeping bag. Now all of you get moving, the bell is about to ring. It was during the final 20 minutes of lunch that something concerning occurred. Reporters had managed to breach the school grounds, creating a disturbance and causing panic among the students. If not for the quick thinking of Tenya and Izumi, the situation could have spiraled out of control. While the rest of the school went through the final 2 PRDS of class, Shota, Nizu, Chiyo Shizenji, and 13 examined the remains of the main gate. Something had disintegrated it into dust, and it was troubling that this had happened without triggering the security system until the reporters had crossed the threshold. Someone had done this deliberately. No reporter would think to try something like this, Nizu remarked, rolling some of the rubble between his paw. It seemed like a declaration of war or perhaps a simple distraction. The computer system had not been accessed, and no students were hurt, aside from some minor scrapes during the panic at lunch, Chio replied, rubbing her chin in confusion, equally unable to make sense of the ruined gate. Regardless, Shota insisted they should remain vigilant. He turned to 13 and stated he would join for the next day's rescue training as an extra precaution. Receiving a nod in response, he returned his gaze to the rubble. It was concerning that many groups would have jumped at the chance to steal information from UA, yet none had. What could have been the reason for the breach? The following day, Shota arrived only to be informed that Tashinori was running late. This did not surprise him. It was likely the man was performing heroics on his commute, which, while admirable, was detrimental to the students' education. Today, they would be performing rescue training, and it was up to the students whether or not to wear their costumes. As some were ill-suited for the activity, Shota yawned while opening the back wall for the hero costumes. He noticed, much like Tashinori, that the number 1 costume slot was missing. This did not surprise him, as Tashinori had mentioned Izumi was using the ISAF training suit she wore during the entrance exam. It made sense. The training suit would be easily replaceable compared to a hero costume. They would be heading to a remote facility for training by bus, so he instructed everyone to get ready and meet at the bus. It did not take long for the class to prepare and make their way to the bus. The only thing that slowed them down was Tenya. Trying to have everyone sit in their assigned class seats, which was impractical due to 3 members of the class having mutation quirks. Shota, however, slumped across the front seat and listened to the conversations among his students, particularly the one between Tsuyu and Izumi, which piqued his interest. Tsuyu turned to the green-haired girl with a smile and mentioned that she normally spoke her mind. She noted that Izumi's quirk was similar to that of the villain Arkanj. Izumi raised an eyebrow in confusion, prompting Tsuyu to elaborate. Ijiro, rubbing the side of his head, admitted he had never heard of that villain. Izumi explained that it was not surprising, as Arkanj's influence had never reached Japan. She continued, sharing that Arkanj was from the Republic of Belarus. Through his actions, the villain group known as the Free Europa Meta Movement gained significant holdings and influence across most of Europe. His quirk, called Sky Dominance, made him nearly untouchable in the skies by almost every hero who tried to confront him. Only by luck did a combined force of All Might and some of the first-wave ISAF heroes manage to bring him down. Hanta whistled, impressed, as several other students nodded in agreement, acknowledging the difficulty of taking down a villain who could withstand multiple heroes. Izumi clarified that while her quirk was similar to his, they only shared the mutations of a classic fighter jet. Tsuyu smiled back at her, asking to be called by her first name. Ijiro gave Izumi a thumbs up, stating that her quirk was perfect for heroics, flashy and powerful, unlike his hardening quirk, which was only effective in a fight and not particularly flashy. He demonstrated by activating his quirk, turning his arm rocky. Izumi shrugged, suggesting that he shouldn't aim to be a flashy hero. If he did, his weaknesses would be glaringly obvious, and villains would exploit that. His quirk was reliable enough to go pro, and with some planning, it could be advantageous in most situations. Alternatively, he could aim for the ISAF. Ijiro rubbed his chin in thought, admitting he had never considered it that way and thanking Izumi for her insight. Tenya then pointed at the ISAF logo and lettering on Izumi's jacket, asking what the ISAF was. His question drew everyone's attention. Izumi explained that the ISAF was the Independent States Allied Hero Force, a multinational hero organization that did not engage in localized heroic actions but intervened to stop threats on a global scale. She noted that they were not for everyone. Curiosity getting the better of her, Achiko asked how Izumi knew so much about them. Izumi mentioned that her uncle was one of the most well-known heroes, and he had helped her learn to use her quirk safely. Ergio inquired if the ISAF would be interested in powerhouses, to which Izumi nodded, noting that Todoroki and Bakugo would fit the profile of heroes the ISAF would consider due to their impressive quirks. However, she clarified that neither had the right attitude that the ISAF sought in their heroes. Tsuyu wondered if Bakugo's unpredictable nature would hinder his popularity. In response, Katsuki erupted in anger, nearly leaping from his seat and causing small explosions to spark from his hands. Denki, startled, moved away from Katsuki, remarking on his abrasive personality. Just as Katsuki was about to unleash more fury, the bus came to a sudden stop, causing the students to jostle. Shota, rising from the front seat, informed the class that they had arrived and reminded Bakugo not to cause any damage outside the training grounds. As he stepped off the bus, he noted the interesting discussions among the students during the ride. He had heard of Archange and was concerned about the implications of having a student with a similar quirk. Leading his class into the large circular building, Shota observed their excitement as they gazed at the various training fields. He welcomed them to the US, gesturing lazily at the surroundings. Denki expressed surprise, thinking they were at Universal Studios Japan, prompting Kyoka to deadpan at his misunderstanding. 13's voice echoed as she introduced the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, a facility designed to simulate various disaster scenarios for training purposes. As she spoke, Shota glanced around, searching for All Might, only to learn from 13 that he was resting in the staff room after a taxing morning commute. Shota felt a wave of frustration wash over him, realizing they would have to proceed without All Might. Before starting, 13 wanted to share some important points about the dangers of quirks. While she spoke, Shota tuned her out, focusing on the ambient sounds from the simulation zones, which helped him clear his mind for the upcoming training exercise. Suddenly, a tearing sound disrupted his thoughts, drawing his attention to the central plaza. He saw a small swirling purple and black dot forming and expanding ominously. With rising dread, Shota watched as a hand pushed the swirling dot wider, and a lanky figure stepped through, followed by a horde of others. Shota shouted for everyone to get back, pulling on his combat goggles as he realized villains had breached UA's walls. He commanded 13 to protect the students while he assessed the situation. Most of the villains appeared to be common thugs, but a lanky blue-haired man in a costume made of hands stood out as the likely ringleader, flanked by others who seemed to serve as his guards. Among them was a large purple-skinned man with a bird-like beak, possessing a strength quirk, and Shota noted the unsettling stillness of the figure, particularly his exposed brain. While the purple-skinned giant was unsettling due to his imposing presence and lack of high mental function, it was the three identical-looking girls that truly concerned Shota. Their metallic blue hair, styled in twin tails, flicked in the breeze as their heads turned sharply, golden eyes scanning the surroundings. Each girl had a tattooed number on her forehead, marking them as 07, 29, and 40. The sight of these numbers troubled Shota, suggesting that the girls were part of a larger, more ominous group. With angular armored sections covering their bodies and sharp wings reminiscent of a troublesome student from his class, these girls could pose a significant threat to his students, much like the entire cadre of villains he faced. Shota knew he had to act quickly, drawing their attention to himself so that his students could escape and alert the rest of the UA staff. It was his primary duty as a hero. All Might was not present. The class list he had obtained, which had decayed the main gate, indicated that All Might was one of the 3 teachers expected to be with the heroic students. His absence was both unexpected and unwelcome. What good was a raid without its final boss? Tamura had gone to great lengths to gather low-level NPCs to keep the class occupied while his powerful ally, Nomu, dealt with the main threat. Sensei had even provided him with additional support in the form of the triplets. They were similar to Nomu but different. While Nomu was created solely to eliminate All Might, the triplets were born from the abilities of a long-imprisoned villain who had once posed a significant challenge to All Might and had taken down many heroes. Tamura was indifferent to their origins or the potential power they possessed. He found the triplets unsettling. Their synchronized speech, alternating who said what while always starting and ending together, was unnerving. He would have preferred to rely solely on Nomu, but Sensei insisted the triplets accompany him for his protection. Tamura expressed his frustration, noting that All Might was absent. He glared at the class of heroes, feeling irritated that the symbol of peace had not shown up for the raid. He surveyed the gathered villains before focusing on Kurogiri, suggesting that perhaps some fallen students would draw All Might out. Receiving a nod from Kurogiri, Tamura watched as the villain made of smoke began to disperse, his wispy form flowing toward the assembled students. A smile crept behind Tamura's mask as he observed their teacher, resembling a scruffy homeless man, leap down the stairs and into the throng of low-level NPCs he had summoned. Tamura watched with little interest as the shaggy hero took down one NPC after another. It was dull to witness a mini-boss overpowering low-level foes. He directed his attention to the triplets, indicating that they should engage the hero, wanting to eliminate any dead weight in his party. The triplets turned to face him, their golden, unblinking eyes reflecting a cold emptiness reminiscent of video game characters. They stated that their orders were to keep him safe, their voices soft and emotionless, almost robotic as they spoke in unison. Tamura, growing frustrated, asserted his authority as the party leader and demanded their obedience. He reached out to grab the arm of the nearest triplet, intending to demonstrate his power. However, before he could touch the triplet marked 07, she stepped back, and the other two turned to face him, leveling their arms with missile tips forming at their ends. It was clear they were prepared to fire, forcing him to halt and growl in frustration at his uncooperative allies. They stated that they did not bend to his whims and pointed toward Nomu, the hulking figure standing nearby, eyes unfocused and tongue lolling out. Tamura snorted and turned back to face the brawl between the disheveled hero and the villains, watching as the hero slammed two of them into each other before vaulting over their fallen forms and rushing toward him. Tamura grinned as the hero charged, counting down the seconds. If he timed it right, he could incapacitate the hero. As the disheveled hero moved an elbow toward his ribs, Tamura twisted his body just enough to intercept the blow. Tamura chuckled darkly, noting the hero's apparent fatigue. He gripped the elbow aimed at his stomach tightly, feeling the strength of the hero waning. He taunted the hero, suggesting that he was not suited for the fight. A wide smile spread across Tamura's face as he watched the pro-hero leap backward, narrowly avoiding two of the villains rushing him, only for them to be swiftly taken down with practiced ease. But before the hero could land properly, Tamura noticed one of the triplets, designated 29, dart past him and toward Shota. As she closed the distance, she moved her hand forward, impacting it against the pro-hero's chest. A loud crack echoed from the impact, propelling Shota further back and leaving him gasping for breath on the ground. As he shakily climbed back to his feet, a large hole appeared in the center of his outfit, revealing a deep bruise forming on his chest. The sight of the massive bruise made Tamura cackle with manic laughter. While it wasn't fatal, the injury would hinder the pro-hero's ability to breathe properly during a prolonged fight, something Tamura intended to exploit. He flicked his gaze between 29, 07 and 40, noticing how 07 and 40 positioned themselves to create an overlapping field of fire on the hero should he attempt to move. This made Tamura's smile widen even more, and he eagerly anticipated the hero's next move. The triplets began to circle around Shota, waiting for him to make a move that would give them an opening to strike. Like predators circling wounded prey, they observed as Shota flicked his gaze between them before locking onto 40, activating his quirk in an attempt to disrupt hers. However, instead of deactivating her quirk as he expected, nothing happened. Not giving Shota a chance to recover from the moment of shock, 40 shot toward him, closing the gap rapidly with her left fist ped back, ready to strike. Seeing the clearly telegraphed attack, Shota braced himself to deflect and reverse her charge to pin her to the ground. At the last possible second, 40 feinted to the left, causing Shota to overshoot his lunge and leave his left side exposed. 07 seized the opportunity, unleashing an explosive attack into Shota's upper left shoulder. The impact seared away part of Shota's hero costume and charred the flesh beneath, sending a sharp spike of pain through his body. Before he could recover or even acknowledge the pain, another explosive impact struck his right arm, engulfing his upper right side in a fiery blast. With most of his upper body covered in burns, blood began to ooze from the wounds, pooling beneath him as he dropped to his knees, hands on the ground for support. He struggled to think of a way to keep his students safe and get them out alive. From what he had observed of the initial group of villains he had subdued, they seemed like nothing more than street thugs, something his students could handle if necessary. However, the 5 villains before him and the one with the warping quirk were the real threats. The white-haired villain, who spoke as if this were a game, stood out as the apparent leader. His quirks seemed to be destruction-based, similar to that of his student Uraraka. Shota realized that if he could incapacitate one of the villain's fingers, it would significantly reduce their effectiveness. That had been his plan after being knocked back by the concussive blast from one of the 3 identical villains, whose quirks bore a frightening resemblance to one of his most challenging students, Midoriya. After enduring rapid impacts from the 3 villains circling him, gliding just above the ground, Shota heard the white-haired villain cackle with delight at the chaos surrounding them. Tamura gestured to the triplets, announcing with a manic grin that they were the perfect distractions to keep Shota occupied while his Nomu remained ready for all might. He reveled in the moment, taunting Shota and suggesting it was time to finish him off before turning his attention to the students. As Shota struggled to regain his footing, he noticed someone soaring above the ruins. It was likely Midoriya, engaging in a reckless maneuver that would be considered mundane by ISAF standards. Shota's focus returned to Tamura, and time seemed to slow as he glared at the villain who dared to threaten his students. The trio of villain girls continued to circle him, poised to strike, yet their attack never came. Shota caught a glimpse of one of the girls, who had shifted her attention toward Midoriya, who was rapidly climbing toward the domed roof of the U. Tamura's frustration boiled over as he saw the triplets divert their focus from Shota to something off in the distance. He shouted at them, demanding they finish their task. Ignoring his commands, the triplets crouched and began to track Midoriya, their voices synchronized as they activated their protocols, preparing to launch themselves into the air with a cloud of dust, declaring their target eradication was authorized. Tamura seethed, watching the triplets abandon Shota in favor of pursuing one of the students. He had been assured of their loyalty, yet they had disregarded his orders twice. He muttered to himself, comparing them to useless randoms in a game before redirecting his attention back to Shota. Shota had managed to pull himself upright despite the blood and injuries marring his body. Tamura, filled with rage, pointed at the hero and commanded his monstrous companion, Nomu, to attack. The hulking creature charged at Shota, hands outstretched to capture him. Just as Nomu was about to reach him, something whizzed past Shota's ear, striking Nomu's chest and causing a powerful explosion that sent the creature crashing backward, a smoldering heap on the ground. Shota quickly turned his gaze to see Midoriya executing a high-G maneuver, pursued closely by the 3 villain triplets, who zigzagged in an attempt to hit her with a barrage of projectiles. Shota snorted at the reckless behavior of one of his students but was surprised to feel support on his left side. He glanced over to see Toru Hagakure, her floating gloves helping him stand. Hagakure explained that her invisibility allowed her to move undetected, and she had come to assist him after one of the villains had separated the glass when he jumped down. Shota grunted in response, acknowledging her presence but feeling frustrated by her disregard for his orders. As they began to make their way back toward the stairs, it was clear that Hagakure was dragging his injured body along, demonstrating her determination to help him despite the danger. Mina still had the earpiece Midoriya had given her from their recent training exercise. She decided to check if it still worked and overheard Midoriya mentioning something about providing close air support. Hagakure saw this as the perfect opportunity to sneak down and inform Shota that Mina was likely not going to hold back against the villains. Shota frowned at this news. For most, not holding back meant aiming to severely injure a villain to incapacitate them. However, it was logical to assume that Midoriya might opt for a more lethal approach. Given that the villains had come to harm students, it made sense to consider their intentions. Tamura noticed Shota and smirked, commenting on the presence of the floating gloves assisting the hero. He taunted Shota, questioning whether the gloves were a summoning to aid in escape or healing. With a wave of his hand, he commanded the Nomu to rise. The Nomu, a charred and smoldering figure, slowly stood up, revealing undamaged purple skin beneath its burnt exterior. A sickening sound echoed as its arm and head snapped back into place, no longer appearing mangled. Shota felt unsettled by the sight of the Nomu, which had seemingly recovered from what he believed was a powerful attack from Midoriya. It was clear that this Nomu possessed a regeneration quirk. Tamura ordered the Nomu to eliminate the student first, then the hero. The Nomu let out a raspy screech and charged toward Shota and Hagakure, its hands outstretched, ready to grab them. Izumi recalled her uncle's mantra about the odds in battle, which he had lived by during his reign in the skies. He had taught her to embrace the challenges of aerial combat, especially against those who sought to bring chaos below. As she felt the familiar tension of an impending attack, Izumi banked hard to the left, urging her engines to produce more move. She dove toward the large lake in the flood zone, feeling a small sense of satisfaction when she heard an explosion followed by a villain's anguished cry. She assessed the 3 airborne villains above her, one diving toward her while the others circled high, ready to intercept. Izumi focused on the diving villainess, preparing her own counterattack. She narrowed her eyes, forming a missile at her wrist. As they passed each other closely, Izumi released the missile, not looking back at the explosion that followed. Instead, she turned her attention to the remaining villains, who were now diving toward her. Weaving between the 2 villains, Izumi pushed her engines to their limits, executing a tight turn to keep them in her sights. She focused on the one lagging behind, determined to close the gap and take action. As Izumi closed in on the slower villainess, now just a meter behind, she unleashed a torrent of bullets, striking the villainess's back and wings, creating several deep gouges. These injuries caused the villainess to lose control mid-flight, spiraling rapidly toward the ground. Izumi cast a brief glance at the plummeting villainess, noting her hard impact against one of the toppled buildings. She reminded herself to keep those who couldn't defend themselves protected. Turning her attention back to the remaining villainess, Izumi observed her weaving between the ruins, banking left and right before executing a tight barrel roll. A dark smirk appeared on Izumi's lips as she watched her target attempt a vertical scissor maneuver, a common tactic used in panic just before resorting to a defensive spiral. Without hesitation, Izumi shot upward after the villainess, maintaining her pace and keeping her target in sight. It didn't take long for the villainess to realize she couldn't shake Izumi off and began to spiral defensively. As the villainess descended into her spiral, Izumi seized the opportunity to strike. With no time for the villainess to recover, Izumi collided with her, extending her hand and getting too close for her quirk to be effective. Grasping the villainess by the throat, Izumi pulled her in close, using her other arm to grab one of the villainess's arms. With a swift motion, she rotated the villainess around and forced her own arm into her back. Ignoring the metallic grunt of pain from the other girl, Izumi reached out with her free hand to grasp one of the villainess's wings. She gripped it tightly and twisted, channeling the strength of her thrusters into the action. The metallic wing began to groan and bend under the pressure Izumi applied. As the wing buckled away from the villainess, Izumi took that moment to release her hold and deliver a kick to the center of the villainess's spine, accelerating her descent toward the ground with a powerful impact that sent a large cloud of dust into the air. Circling overhead, Izumi waited for the dust to clear while scanning the area. Her classmates were likely fighting for their lives, either alone or in groups, against villains intent on causing harm. Yet something about this attack felt off. While it seemed planned to strike a blow against All Might and the heroics industry, it felt too much like a probing attack. It reminded her of a lesson from her time at the ISAF training base in the Hawaiian archipelago. She recalled how the Chukotka Autonomous Region of Russia achieved independence by funding and training heroes before expanding into Alaska. They first supported small-time villain organizations to target key infrastructure in the largely isolated American state. Observing the slow response of American heroes in Alaska to organized villain activity, the militarized heroes of Chukotka launched a devastating blitzkrieg, crushing local resistance. However, before Chukotka could solidify its hold on Alaska, a joint force of American and Russian heroes, along with the IASHF's 108th Tactical Hero Squadron, intervened, breaking Chukotka's military might with ruthless efficiency. The conflict concluded with Alaska remaining part of the United States and Chukotka back under Russian control. While many might view this conflict as a mere footnote in history, for the IASHF, It served as a wake-up call regarding organized villain groups and rogue nations with quirk-focused militaries seeking to alter the world order or expand their territory. By funding local villain organizations to test their targets' response times and defensive capabilities, they could divert attention from their true intentions until it was too late to intervene. If this League of Villains was attempting a similar strategy, then this display of low-level thugs was merely a probe, and it wouldn't be long before the real attack occurred. Izumi knew she had to inform her uncle about this, even if it turned out to be nothing. The risk was too great, especially in a country that had produced some of the most notorious villains in history. Banking around, Izumi glanced down at the slowly clearing dust cloud where the villainess had impacted the ground, observing as the girl slowly rose to her unsteady feet. Exposed wiring littered her body, with arcs of electricity dancing from the broken wiring across her skin, while oil dripped down from a large tear in her wing. A cold detachment spread in Izumi's mind as she stared at the villainess. The girl was nothing more than a construct built to mimic, a fake designed to try and engage with those who held dominion over the clouds. Her very existence, along with that of the two identical girls she had already dealt with, was an insult beyond measure, and it was something Izumi felt compelled to correct. Flying another circle around the villainess, she clenched her fists and unleashed a barrage of 6 high-explosive missiles towards the downed girl. All 6 missiles impacted their target, detonating in a large concussive blast before Izumi banked around, scanning for the next threat. Across the ruins in the main plaza, Izumi spotted her next target, one of the only remaining threats, a large, hulking, purple, bird-beaked mutant. For a brief moment, she watched as the giant purple brute launched itself toward her homeroom teacher. Her mind raced with calculations of distance and the likelihood of intercepting the brute in time, but each calculation came up short. She would never make it in time to prevent the brute from harming her teacher. Determined, Izumi shot off towards the purple brute, pushing her body beyond its limits. Her muscles burned, and her bones creaked with tension as pressure waves began to build behind her. Continuing her race across the ruins, she kept her eyes locked on her target, only to see the spiky red-haired boy she had teleported with, Eijiro Kirishima, make a move. After she had incapacitated the few villains waiting for them, he had rushed to the plaza just in time to hurl his hardened body between the purple brute's fist and their teacher. This was just the break Izumi needed to close the distance. Feeling her body tense and groan in slight pain, Izumi sensed the familiar pressure burst happening behind her as she broke the sound barrier, rocketing towards the purple brute like a ballistic missile. Ignoring the resounding boom that drew everyone's attention, she closed the gap at nearly Mach 2 before whirling around to slam her right foot hard into the brute's exposed head. The impact sent the purple brute hurtling away from Kirishima, accompanied by a loud sonic burst that echoed through the area. Ignoring the pain in her foot, Izumi turned her attention toward the villain clearly in charge, who hovered in place, aiming his outstretched arms toward her. He was covered in severed hands, and she watched as he began to twitch and shake in anger. He growled out, raising a finger to point at Izumi, expressing his frustration. His voice rose to a shrill screech as he jabbed an accusatory finger toward her, complaining about her interference in his plans. He expressed his anger over her attempts to take out his main threats and how she had disrupted his strategy. The villain's agitation was palpable, and an uncomfortable silence fell between him and the hero students, a calm before the storm. Suddenly he let out an unhinged scream in rage, declaring that he would not be beaten by someone he deemed unworthy. He turned to face the hole in the nearby wall created by Izumi's earlier attack, commanding his monstrous creature to get up and retaliate. As if it had not suffered any impact, the purple brute, now identified as Nomu, shot out from the hole at near Mach speed, its right fist pulled back and ready to strike. Yet before it could reach Izumi and her classmates, she maintained a blank expression as she whirled her arms to face the Nomu. Not giving the abomination a chance to close the gap, Izumi unleashed a salvo of 8 high-explosive missiles. Each missile impacted the Nomu, pitching the beast back and sending it sprawling high into the air, only for a large glacier of ice to shoot up and ensnare the Nomu within. Shoto Todoroki expressed doubt about his ice's ability to contain the creature before them, gliding along a path of ice toward his classmates. He noted the formidable appearance of the creature, acknowledging its toughness. Kirishima, wincing as he rubbed his arms, remarked on the creature's strength, feeling the effects of its attack. The damage to his hardening was evident, as if it had been easily overcome. Aizawa, struggling with his own injuries, urged the students to leave immediately, emphasizing that they were not prepared for the threat they faced. His gaze settled on Izumi, and in that moment he recognized a spark of heroism in her deep green eyes, a determination that reminded him of All Might. He realized that Izumi would be a significant force to reckon with. Izumi, filled with calm determination, instructed Kirishima to assist Hagakure in getting Aizawa to safety. She directed Todoroki to keep the deranged villain from advancing further. Kirishima expressed concern for Midoriya, questioning her plan to confront the creature alone. Izumi responded with a steely resolve, acknowledging the creature's intent to kill her and stating her intention to draw its focus. As the ice glacier began to crack, Izumi launched herself toward the now freed Nomu, unleashing a barrage of attacks to keep its attention on her. She maneuvered skillfully, leading the creature away from her classmates and toward a safer area. Aizawa watched as Izumi engaged the Nomu, delivering a series of precise strikes while evading its attacks. However, soon enough, they disappeared from his view behind a wall of ice, accompanied by the creature's furious screams. Feeling the weight of his injuries, Aizawa and two students reached the top of the stairs, where they found the critically injured 13 and a number of students safe. He sighed in relief as he listened to their rapid discussions, piecing together how the group had successfully distracted the villain long enough for Ida to alert Yue. Just then, Aizawa heard the main doors of the USJ being forcefully opened, followed by a voice that, under normal circumstances, he might find irritating. However, in that moment, the determined yet restrained rage in All Might's voice reassured him that his students would be safe. All Might's commanding presence filled the USJ as he emerged from the smoke, having burst through the doors. His expression, usually one of encouragement, was now filled with fury, signaling that the villains had crossed a line they should not have dared to. With All Might's arrival, the villain's plans were destined to fail, as his fierce determination promised protection for his students. The USJ, a facility valued at 1,172,879,919 yen, was renowned for its advanced natural disaster simulation capabilities and top-notch security. However, this security was compromised by an individual with a warping quirk, while the on-site monitoring devices were rendered ineffective by a simple electrical quirk. For Nizu and Yue as a whole, this incident was a significant embarrassment, highlighting the vulnerabilities within the heroics industry in Japan when its premier academy could be so easily attacked without substantial consequences for the perpetrators. 3 days had passed since the USJ incident, during which Nizu diligently reviewed all available information and managed the fallout from the events. A pro-hero and one of his teachers, Ainen Rose, known as the Space Hero, 13, had sustained major injuries and would be sidelined for several weeks, if not months, during recovery. Fortunately, 13 had been rescued by the quick thinking and bravery of the first-year students. However, Ainen was not the only one affected. Aizawa had also incurred minor injuries that, while not life-threatening, would require him to rest and take on light duties until after the upcoming sports festival. Nizu understood that Aizawa would likely resist the idea of remaining inactive for the recommended recovery PRD, especially given the quirk exhaustion-related dry eye he was experiencing. If Aizawa attempted to return to work prematurely, Nizu was prepared to intervene, as neglecting that injury could lead to serious consequences, including potential blindness and the loss of his quirk. Nizu was ready to use Aizawa's own logical reasoning against him to ensure proper recovery. Yet, Nizu's primary concern was the injured students. Most had emerged from the incident with only quirk exhaustion and minor injuries, which Recovery Girl had treated without complications. However, 2 students had suffered more severe injuries for very different reasons. The first was Minoru Mineta, who had endured significant first- and second-degree burns due to an incident involving Katsuki Bakugo. Based on the limited information Nizu had gathered from Tsuyu Azui, the only other student present, and the interrogations of the captured villains, he could piece together a likely scenario. It appeared that Bakugo had been more focused on defeating the villains than on the safety of his classmates. This distraction likely led him to accumulate an excess of sweat in his gauntlets. Several villains attempted to board a sinking boat in the flood zone. Bakugo had fired a blast from his gauntlet to drive them off, inadvertently catching Mineta in the explosion. While Bakugo's actions were aggressive and resulted in another student needing hospitalization, Nizu believed that any punitive measures could be mitigated by framing Bakugo's behavior as a reaction to the panic and stress of the villain attack. At most, Nizu considered removing the gauntlets from Bakugo's costume and arranging counseling sessions with the guidance counselor to address his aggressive tendencies and disregard for the consequences of his actions. However, this situation paled in comparison to the injuries sustained by the other severely affected student. From the moment Izumi Midoriya entered UA, it seemed as though fate had conspired to turn Nizu's life into a nightmare. Reports from students who witnessed her struggle, along with Aizawa's and Toshinori's accounts upon their arrival at the scene, detailed the harrowing injuries Izumi had suffered during her desperate fight for survival. She had faced not only a trio of robotic attackers but also a formidable villain known as Nomu. The report from Toshinori was particularly distressing, especially when combined with the medical report obtained from Shizuoka Prefectural General Hospital, which left Nizu grappling with a sense of dread and concern for the future. Looking down at the report, Nizu reread what Toshinori had witnessed after entering the USJ and subduing the last few inconsequential villains. From Nizu's analysis, these villains were merely hired muscle meant to distract heroes from the main objective. The primary antagonist had bellowed for a creature known as the Nomu to confront Toshinori. The report detailed how the Nomu had emitted an ear-piercing scream from the ruins zone before attempting to leap back toward the central plaza. However, mid-leap, it had been intercepted by a barrage of 8 high-explosive missiles, knocking the Nomu off course and into the dirt. Following this, Midoriya hurtled toward the recovering Nomu. Her body bore numerous bruises, burn marks, and signs of extreme strain from the high G-forces she had endured. The visible damage to her skin suggested that her internal condition was likely under severe stress as well. As she charged toward the Nomu, suffering from tunnel vision, a common effect of vertical G-forces, Midoriya failed to notice a black mist portal springing into existence to her left, expanding in front of her. The portal opened just inches from the ground, causing her to slam into the earth at near supersonic speeds. Nizu placed Toshinori's report down, which detailed his engagement with the Nomu, while a group of students in the plaza worked to hold off the villain in the hand-based costume and attempted to get Midoriya out of harm's way. Once again, Nizu turned his attention to the medical report, needing to memorize it fully. Midoriya had been rushed to the Shizuoka Prefectural General Hospital Intensive Care Unit, where the doctors faced a monumental struggle to stabilize her. Over 60% of her bones had suffered stress fractures due to the constant changing G-forces. She had internal bleeding from a kidney rupture caused by the impact with the ground, burst blood vessels in both eyes, a collapsed lung, and complete fractures in both her arms and legs. The majority of the surface capillaries in her skin had ruptured, alongside the complications from her quirk-related growths. The extent of Midoriya's injuries would likely end her chances of a heroic career. Nizu pondered how he would break this news to her mother. For the past 2 days, he had been trying to find a way to avoid delivering such devastating news. However, both Chio and his own deductions indicated that there was nothing that could be done. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts, prompting Nizu to take a deep breath to steady himself. He called for the visitor to enter, his voice lacking its usual cheerfulness. Standing in the doorway was Ryo Inui, the hunting dog hero, hound dog, and the school's guidance counselor. Nizu offered a welcoming nod, acknowledging Ryo's presence. "I take it Mrs. Midoriya has arrived?" Nizu inquired, wishing the circumstances were better. Ryo nodded stiffly, his expression serious. He growled out that she was not alone, which surprised Nizu. From what he had learned about the Midoriya family, Mrs. Midoriya was in Japan while her husband worked overseas and rarely returned home, so it was unlikely that Mr. Midoriya was with her. "Oh?" Nizu asked, looking into Ryo's eyes. Then who is with her? I thought Mrs. Midoriya would be attending alone. Rio explained that he was there at the request of Mrs. Midoriya's husband, only providing his hero name and title, the convict security hero, Bandog. Nizu blinked slowly, maintaining an impassive expression. He had heard of this particular hero and his role within the IASHF. Bandog was unique, not only by IASHF standards but also among local heroes. He specialized in villain rehabilitation, but not in the conventional sense. Instead of having villains serve their time in prison under guard, Bandog managed and controlled an IASHF-backed penal team. Known to both IASHF forces and localized HPSCs as the 444th Squadron, or Spare Squadron, Bandog maintained strict control over his team with his quirk, confinement. This ability allowed him to restrict or even nullify anyone's quirk from whom he had a hair sample for as long as he desired. A truly powerful quirk, it was a double-edged sword in the hands of someone working for IASHF. While Bandog utilized his quirk for what could be considered heroic purposes, his role allowed IASHF to manage some of the most dangerous villains effectively. Nizu recognized the potential for IASHF to offer various nations the service of containing their worst criminals while charging a nominal fee, creating a legal extortion racket. Now, Nizu found himself with Bandog at his school, summoned by a student's parent. Although not the most ideal circumstance, Nizu saw an opportunity to turn the situation to his advantage. A small smile spread across his lips as he focused on Rio. Nizu thanked Rio and asked him to show the guests in. He watched as a relatively short, emotional woman entered, clearly Mrs. Midoriya, dressed in the typical attire of a middle-class stay-at-home parent. Following her was a man at least a foot taller, with chestnut hair cut in a crew style. He wore a dark gray flight suit adorned with various datapads and readout devices. The only visible markings, aside from the IASHF logo on his chest, were a diagonal black and white shield featuring a snarling blue Rottweiler. Nizu surmised that these devices were likely linked to tactical readouts and vital signs from IASHF heroes. The serious expression on the man's face conveyed everything Nizu needed to know. While Mrs. Midoriya appeared concerned and panicked about her child's condition, this man, the hero Bandog, was there for one purpose: to seek an explanation for what had happened and gather information about the villains responsible. Nizu gestured for the two to take a seat. As they settled in, he decided to begin with his usual jovial greeting, hoping to break the ice. He introduced himself, emphasizing his unique nature and ending with a smile. However, Bandog's stern voice cut through the room, halting Nizu's attempt to lighten the mood. He expressed the gravity of the situation, noting that the daughter of one of IASHF's best ground support operatives lay in an ICU bed due to a villain incursion at the school. Anger tinged Bandog's voice as he insisted that Mrs. Midoriya deserved an explanation. Inko's voice trembled as she spoke, holding back her emotions. She questioned how such a tragedy could occur when her daughter had come to learn to be a hero. Nizu absorbed Inko Midoriya's words, noting the wavering in her voice and the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Though he found it challenging to read human emotions, he recognized the signs of a distressed parent and hoped the news he would deliver would not worsen her distress. Yet, it was not just Inko's body language that concerned Nizu, it was Bandog's harsh tone and military posture. While many might see him as naturally aggressive, Nizu perceived a well-trained predator, a man who embodied the canine emblem he represented. It troubled Nizu that a parent would request such a figure to be present. He would ponder this later. For now, he needed to focus on the task at hand. Nizu began to explain the findings from their initial investigation, piecing together information from interrogations of captured villains, statements from students, and accounts from teachers present during the incident. He revealed that the self-proclaimed League of Villains had attacked UA with the intent of making an attempt on All Might's life. Nizu paused, watching as shock registered in Inko's eyes, while Bandog's narrowed, revealing either disbelief or anger. He continued, clarifying that the entire event had been an accident due to All Might's absence during the lesson. An accident? Bandog snarled, while Inko looked horrified. She demanded to know if All Might's high profile, now tied to a single location, and his failure to perform his duties were the reasons Izumi was in the ICU. Nizu could only respond with a nod before Inko interrupted, pressing for answers about her daughter's future at UA. He explained that, given the injuries Izumi had sustained, it would be best for her to withdraw from the heroics course. Nizu braced himself for a parent's breakdown, but instead, Inko's watery eyes hardened with determination. "You want to remove my daughter from her dream school for something that happened while she was under your care?" Inko's voice had taken on a steely edge, her gaze intense enough to trigger Nizu's instincts. Bandog snorted in disgust and leaned forward, resting his elbows on Nizu's desk, asserting his dominance. He questioned whether they believed Izumi would be unable to recover well enough to return to the heroics course. Nizu remained calm as he explained that while recovery was possible, the injuries she had sustained could be career-ending for a pro hero, let alone a hero trainee. He expected Bandog to understand this, given his own background, but was surprised to see a smirk appear on the man's lips. Once Izumi was cleared to move, with Mrs. Midoriya's permission, she would be relocated to the IASHF medical facility in Chiba, where a specialized medical team would assist in her recovery. Nizu was shocked to learn that the IASHF had a team capable of reconstructing heroes with career-ending injuries. It made sense that such specialists would be kept a secret, but Nizu wondered why Bandog would reveal this information. If what he and All Might suspected about Izumi's lineage was true, the IASHF might be planning for the next generation's most formidable hero. Nizu inquired how long Izumi would be out of action while the specialists treated her. Bandog calmly replied that she would likely be ready to return to the heroics course a few weeks after the upcoming sports festival. Inko wiped her eyes and stated that they had much to discuss. She recalled that Nizu had wanted to speak about her daughter a few days ago, and now she understood why. Nizu nodded, aware that a lengthy conversation awaited them, one that would reveal shocking information about the IASHF and Izumi Midoriya's role in their plans. A pulse of rapid neurological activity rippled from the fingertips of Avril Mead, the ISHF's best and youngest medical specialist, known as Scrap Queen among the heroes she treated. Her quirk, Magic Touch, danced across her patient's broken body. With each passing second, Avril felt her quirk gently pulse and weave through the damaged synaptic pathways, torn muscles, and splintered bones. She sensed not only the slow process of healing but also something deeper, a connection to the very essence of her patient's being. Since being recruited by the IASHF and using her quirk to restore many of their heroes to health, Avril had only felt this response from a person's quirk factor a handful of times. It was like a rush of something dormant spilling into the world. As she continued to mend her patient, the feeling lingered, reaching into her own quirk, not with malice but with encouragement, as if this dormant awakening force wanted her to persevere and succeed. Avril had experienced something similar 3 times before, during her assistance to 3 of the IASHF's elite, the Angel, the Ghost, and the Cross. These monikers were often used alongside their hero names, especially by the rogue elements they were deployed to confront. Avril found it peculiar that the IASHF never referred to their adversaries as villains, instead classifying threats as hostile combatants or, in the case of their more destructive heroes and their field support, bogies. This was likely a result of the regimented, military-style structure of the organization. With a sigh, Avril removed her hands from her patient, having done all she could for the moment. Continuing now would likely hinder both her own and the patient's quirk and impede proper healing. Looking over the results of her work, Avril was impressed by how adaptable her patient's quirk was to her treatment. The damage sustained should have rendered the flight aspect of her quirk beyond her reach. Yet, as Avril and the other IASHF medical staff worked on their young charge, carefully removing the jagged remnants of her wings, they were surprised to see the wing-like growths twist and reform, taking on a new shape and orientation, as if her quirk was evolving. This was new. Perhaps it was a sign that her patient's generation was on the verge of reaching the long-debated concept of quirk singularity. Though Avril did not fully support or believe in that theory, witnessing her patient's quirk adapt and evolve in response to her healing lent some credence to the idea. It was something Avril knew she would need to discuss with her superiors. A stern voice, familiar to all in the IASHF, called out from behind her, demanding a report on the patient's prognosis. Avril bit back a witty response, knowing it could lead to consequences, and turned to face the ever-serious Bandog. The report revealed that the patient would make a full recovery given time. Avril noted that she still needed a few more treatments followed by standard post-operation care, probably another week for her quirk to finish its work, then a couple more weeks of physiotherapy. However, something about how her patient's quirk and body were responding felt unusual. Bandog shifted his stern gaze from Avril to take in the form of their young patient, pressing for details. Avril explained that the quirk was responding too well to her own, almost as if it wanted to grow and change by using her quirk as a catalyst. Bandog inquired whether these changes would impact the patient's ability to continue heroics. His expression remained stoic, but his eyes revealed the cold, calculating mindset he was known for among the inmates deemed rehabilitated. Avril reassured him that the changes would not negatively impact her effectiveness in the field. The inorganic components might look different, but there would be no reduction in her potential. She speculated that her patient's subconscious mind was using the interaction with Avril's quirk to undergo an awakening. This comment raised Bandog's eyebrow, hinting at the implications of Avril's words. It was not uncommon for those she healed to experience subtle changes that made their quirks easier to use, but this was unprecedented. The idea of a healing quirk serving as a catalyst for an awakening sent a shiver down Bandog's spine. The girl's quirk and prior training under the IASHF had already laid the groundwork for her to become a future replacement for their Ribbon Reaper when her uncle eventually retired. Continue with her recovery, Bandog instructed Avril with a curt nod before he exited the room. He promised to ensure she had better accommodations during their stay. Avril watched the back of the ISAF's guard dog as he left. For the first time since being taken into ISAF custody for using her quirk to heal an S-rank villain, she was surprised that Bandog could show any kindness to those under his care. Shaking off her thoughts, she returned to the task of healing her young patient. As Avril worked, Bandog strode through the compound's halls toward the office he had temporarily set up during his and Spare Squadron's stay in Japan. Once inside, he locked the door, took a seat, and opened a long stream of files on the ISAF laptop. He reviewed not only the brief report Avril had provided on Izumi Midoriya's recovery rate but also the comprehensive medical report he had compiled. In addition to this report, Bandog had managed to gather a complete account of Midoriya's early training with her uncle and various heroes she had interacted with. This involved calling in favors from Sky Eye, Thunderhead, Okaniba, and Ghost Eye. What he discovered was a pattern. Midoriya consistently rose to meet every challenge presented to her, showcasing a blend of the most formidable attributes of the ISAF's elite. He noted her tactical awareness from as early as 5 years old, right up to the USJ incident, where she demonstrated a focus on unit cohesion and lightning strikes, tactics often used by the Ghost and his small wing of demons. The hallmarks of the Angel were evident in her psychological profile. She never viewed a single hero or element as the sole cause of victory but rather as one factor among many. This perspective positively influenced those around her, as evidenced by reports indicating that the students who were near her during the USJ incident emerged the least panicked. The most significant indicator was her combat performance, a subtle merging of the distinctive qualities of the Angel, the Ghost, and her uncle, the Ribbon Reaper. Though still young and inexperienced, it was clear she would soon rival the best the ISAF had to offer. This was not a dilemma for the ISAF, which had always planned to bring her into the fold. However, the local HPSC was attempting to complicate those plans. Japan's corrupt and ego-driven HPSC had muddied the waters surrounding the USJ incident in an attempt to leverage concessions or control over UA. Their strategy involved blaming Midoriya for the villain deaths caused not by her but by another student with a quirk that matched some of Izumi's destructive capabilities. Understanding how the Japanese HPSC operated, Bandog was disgusted by the thought of them using Midoriya's freedom from prosecution as leverage to force her into compliance with their agenda. This realization prompted him and the top brass at ISAF to intervene and take control of the situation. Officially, Midoriya would be integrated into the 444th Squadron as a spare undergoing rehabilitation, but this would merely serve as a cover for her recovery. Rubbing his eyes, Bandog clicked the earpiece in his left ear, switching to the guard's station channel by the temporary holding cells. Once the guard acknowledged him, Bandog issued orders. He requested that Spare 2, Spare 7, and Spare 9 report to his office for deployment orders. The tone of his voice made it clear that the mission would be perilous, a reminder that as a penal unit, he determined whether they had served their time or would face dire consequences for their past actions. Meanwhile, in a secluded bar in the Kamino ward of Yokohama City, Tamura Shigaraki was throwing what could only be described as a childish tantrum over being denied something he believed he deserved. In his rage, he slammed his fingers down on various objects, activating his quirk and reducing them to dust. Nearby, the misty figure of the barman and his right-hand man, Kurojiri, stood patiently, waiting for Shigaraki to calm down. "Have you calmed down enough to explain to me what happened, Tamura?" The slightly distorted voice from a computer screen sitting on the bar inquired. "It sounds as if you encountered something unexpected." Tamura expressed his frustration by gripping a table leg and reducing it to dust. He explained that a wallet warrior had disrupted their plans, taking out his allies and causing trouble until the symbol of peace arrived. "Interesting. It seems there is more at play than I first thought," the voice observed, remaining calm and speculative. "While we may have underestimated not only the symbol of peace but heroes as a whole, we did not come away empty-handed." Tamura's tantrum began to subside as he focused on the screen, asking what his master meant. "All in due time, Tamura, all in due time," the voice chuckled before addressing Kurojiri. "Were you able to recover our Nomu or the combat drones lent to us?" Kurojiri sighed in disappointment, explaining that the Nomu had been sent flying and he lost track of its location, while the drones had been reduced to scrap. He felt it was more important to ensure their escape. "A pity, but not a great loss, or so their own tells me at any rate. They seem remarkably unconcerned with the loss," the voice mused. "Almost as if they expected it to happen and were content with the returned combat data they transmitted." "What does that mean for us, Sensei?" Tamura asked, scratching at his throat as he focused intently on the screen. "Well, it means a change in tactics is in order. Instead of overwhelming numbers, perhaps a different approach." The voice paused, a chuckle echoing out. "Similar to those games, you seem so fond of a small group of strong, capable allies." Tamura's eyes widened as he grasped what his sensei was suggesting. A demented grin slowly formed on his face as his mind processed the idea. He realized he needed a raid team. "Yes, my boy, that is it. Now why don't you see about doing that through our mutual friend, HM?" As Tamura giggled and cackled, the voice behind the screen turned its attention to Kurojiri, asking if he could handle this task. "Of course, sir. Anything for Tamura. Nothing is too much," Kurojiri dutifully responded before the feed to the monitor cut. With his young apprentice left to plan in his unique way, All for One focused on his only physical guest, a peculiar man. It was curious why a European gentleman from one of the many nations on that continent would not only be fully aware of who he was but would seek him out to offer assistance. This was something to investigate further, but for now he had an alliance to forge. "I must say, I am surprised by your continued offer of assistance to my young apprentice and his plans, or that you have yet to name a price for such help. So tell me, what will it cost Tamura and by extension myself?" All for One paused briefly, using one of his many sensory quirks to study the dark-haired, bespectacled man. He noted the indifference in his posture, more focused on the tablet in his hand than on their conversation. "A quirk, perhaps, or several for your person or creations?" "No, I do not require anything of that nature," the man replied, glancing up from the tablet only briefly before looking back down. "It is information I require for field testing the next incarnation of the synthetic metahumans, so I am willing to supply some of them to your cause." Once again, a generous offer of support, Dr. Schroeder, was it? At the man's nod of confirmation, All for One continued. "You mentioned that you require field testing of your synthetics, but there is another piece of information. Care to enlighten me on what that is?" "The Independent States Allied Hero Force has a secure prison somewhere within Japan," the now identified Schroeder began, looking at All for One. As it's located within Japanese territory, the local Public Safety Commission would be aware of its location and any prisoner transfers set to take place to and from said prison. All for One let out a deep chuckle, realizing what Schroeder wanted. His sardonic laugh filled the area before slowly subsiding. Oh, this is rich. You seek information to break out Archange, and what led you to assume I would have access to such information? You might be considered a myth here in Japan and most of the world, but there are those of us who know the truth about how far your reach extended and likely still does. Schroeder maintained his gaze on All for One. So you likely have elements of your empire inside every facet of Japan, making such information child's play for you. You are correct, All for One chuckled. I will contact you again with the information regarding the date of such a transfer. Until then, it has been a pleasure meeting you, Dr. Schroeder. With those final words, All for One reached deep into his pool of stolen quirks for the warping quirk he kept for himself, opening a swirling black rift behind his guest and watching as the doctor calmly turned and walked through the portal. Such an odd meeting with a strange individual. All for One had spent the entire time that Schroeder had been in his presence using every sensory quirk he had available to glean all he could about the man. A quirkless individual whose nationality he could not place, and one who gave no indication of wanting a quirk in any capacity. That surprised him, as since the very moment he had begun his harvest of quirks, he had only ever met a scant few who either hated their quirks or did not desire one. He would have to keep an eye on this, lest Schroeder prove to be a liability to his plans. Not that he wouldn't be able to handle whatever the doctor could contemplate. While All for One sat in thought, contemplating the potential benefits and challenges that Schroeder would bring to his plans, the doctor calmly walked onto the green expanse of Kaminone Island. Ignoring the vanishing swirl of black ooze behind him, Schroeder approached the treeline, taking note of the rows of camouflaged shipping containers that had been smuggled onto the island. As he moved beyond the short treeline, Schroeder entered the disguised hangar with a smirk on his face. This old, hidden Japanese air self-defense force base, long abandoned, had proven to be an excellent staging area for his research and the 8 individuals who comprised the remnants of Europe's most feared villain organizations. These 8 had played crucial roles in helping Schroeder escape the IASHF's Ribbon Reaper when he had come seeking Archange, aiding his flight to South America. They had assisted him again when a combination of unfortunate circumstances and the whims of a megalomaniacal dictator had stirred the already tense international relations between Argentina and Great Britain, leading to the invasion of both the Falkland Islands and the Argentinian province of Tierra del Fuego. The maniac's reasoning for the invasion had cost Schroeder another research lab and forced him to flee once more, as the Argentine angel had picked up his trail. This escape had been just as disastrous as the time when the Ribbon had captured Archange and his protégé, resulting in the loss of his first significant success. While All for One believed he had a monopoly on creating monsters through forced quirk combinations, Schroeder had perfected the process independently, allowing those who underwent his procedures to retain their minds. It had cost him his most destructive creation to date, known to half of the 8 as the vampire. She had been captured similarly to Archange, and from the information they had gathered over the years, they determined that both she and Archange had been kept together. Provided All for One delivered the correct information, the 2 teams serving their imprisoned masters would ensure their escape. They would reclaim their lord and lady, while Schroeder would once again have 2 of the final components needed to complete preparations for a plan that had been decades in the making, a plan to prevent the end of humanity, whether they were grateful or not. Schroeder instructed the 8 individuals in the old hangar to be ready, and they all stood, flexing and stretching the inorganic folding wings and jet engines that had grown from each of them. This was another of his successes, having copied Archange's quirk to bestow it upon those deemed worthy. He informed them that once they had the information, things would begin to move much faster. It would not be long before Sol would rise again, allowing Strigan to feast on the weak below.